She wasn't supposed to be there, not on the executive floor, not in the CEO's private conference room, and definitely not about to expose the one truth that could destroy everything. Evelyn Parker, a cleaner, invisible, forgotten, stood trembling before billionaire Adrian Cole, a man who built empires on precision and control. One scheduling mistake, one moment of silence instead of confession, one question that changed everything. Because what she said next didn't just shock him. It shattered the carefully constructed lies holding his entire company together. If you want to know how the quietest voice became the most dangerous weapon, stay until the end. Hit like, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of the 37th floor hummed with a sterile indifference that Evelyn Parker had grown accustomed to. At 2:47 a.m., the executive level of Meridian Global was supposed to be empty, a cathedral of glass and steel where decisions worth billions were made, and where people like her existed only as ghosts who cleaned up after the gods of commerce had gone home. But tonight, something was different. Evelyn stood outside conference room 3701, her cleaning cart silent beside her, staring at the schedule on her tablet with growing confusion. The notification glowed insistently, deep clean required. Conference room 3701, priority assignment. She'd been cleaning office buildings for 3 years, ever since her scholarship money ran out halfway through her economics degree at State. 3 years of night shifts, of being invisible, of existing in the spaces between other people's important lives. She knew the rhythm of these buildings like a second heartbeat, and this didn't fit the pattern. Executive conference rooms were cleaned on Fridays. Today was Tuesday. Her supervisor, Marcus, was already gone for the night, unreachable. The building's night manager wouldn't answer his phone until his next rounds at 4 a.m. The message was clear, stamped with the red flag that meant non-negotiable. Do this now. Evelyn pushed her cart forward, the wheels whispering against marble that cost more per square foot than she made in a month. Through the glass walls, she could see the conference room, a space designed to intimidate, with a table that could seat 20, screens built into the walls, and a view of the city that made you feel like you owned the world below. It was empty. Dark. Exactly as it should be. She swiped her access card. The lock clicked open with a soft beep that seemed too loud in the silence. The motion sensors triggered, and warm light flooded the space, revealing something that made her stomach drop. The room wasn't empty. Papers covered the table, thick reports, spreadsheets, presentation folders stamped with confidential in aggressive red letters. Someone had been working here recently, very recently. The coffee in one of the cups was still steaming. Evelyn's hand hovered over her cart, every instinct screaming at her to leave, to lock the door, to pretend she'd never been here. But the assignment was clear, priority, required. She took a breath and stepped inside. The room smelled like expensive coffee and the particular kind of tension that came from high-stakes decisions. She began methodically, trash first, then surfaces, then, "You're early!" Evelyn spun around so fast she knocked over the recycling bin she'd just emptied. Papers scattered across the floor, quarterly reports, market analyses, documents she definitely shouldn't be seeing. Adrian Cole stood in the doorway. She recognized him instantly, though she'd only ever seen him from a distance or in the company newsletter photos that didn't do justice to the physical presence of the man. At 39, Adrian Cole had built Meridian Global from a mid-sized consulting firm into a multinational powerhouse in just over a decade. Forbes called him the architect. Business Insider called him the most ruthless dealmaker under 40. The cleaning staff called him the one who never leaves because his office lights were always on, no matter what shift you worked. He was tall, lean in the way of men who forgot to eat when they were working, with dark hair showing the first threads of silver at the temples. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, the uniform of someone who'd been working for 16 hours straight and wasn't close to finished. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the ocean, and right now they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. Evelyn started, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. I was told to clean this room. I can come back." "No." He walked into the room, and Evelyn instinctively took a step back. He didn't seem to notice, moving to the table and gathering the scattered papers with practiced efficiency. "You're here for the interview. You might as well start early. Shows initiative." Interview. The word hung in the air between them like something alive and dangerous. Evelyn should have corrected him, should have explained the mistake immediately, should have apologized and backed out of the room before this went any further. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his voice, not physical tiredness, but something deeper, something that sounded like a man who'd asked the same questions 1,000 times and gotten the same rehearsed answers. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not through her the way most people in this building did, but actually at her, like she was a person who might have something interesting to say. Or maybe it was the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the eviction notice she'd received that morning, the student loans in default, the sick mother in Ohio who needed help. Evelyn couldn't afford to give. Maybe it was 3 years of being invisible finally catching up to her in one crystallized moment of reckless desperation. Whatever it was, Evelyn heard herself say, "I apologize for the confusion with the papers." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. Adrian waved it off, already moving on. He didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, he took a seat in the middle, gesturing for her to sit across from him. Up close, Evelyn could see the details the newsletter photos missed. The fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many late nights, the coffee stain on his cuff, the wedding ring that was no longer there but had left a pale band on his finger. "I'm going to be direct," Adrian said, pulling out a folder from the stack. "I've interviewed 11 people for this position. Senior analysts from top firms, consultants with credentials that would make your head spin, people who've advised Fortune 500 CEOs since before you were born. Know what they all had in common?" Evelyn shook her head, not trusting her voice. "They all told me exactly what they thought I wanted to hear." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "So here's what I want from you. Honesty, not politeness. Not the answer you think will get you the job. Just raw, unfiltered truth. Can you do that?" Something in his voice made Evelyn believe he actually meant it. And maybe that's what made her nod, even as every rational part of her brain screamed that this was spiraling into disaster. "Good." Adrian opened the folder, but he didn't look at it. "Here's the scenario. Meridian Global is considering a major expansion into emerging markets. Southeast Asia, specifically. The projected returns are exceptional, 37% over 5 years according to our analysis. The board is enthusiastic. Our investors are pushing hard. Everything points to go." He paused, his fingers drumming once on the table. "What's your first question?" Evelyn's mind raced. This was insane. She was a cleaner pretending to be a consultant, about to give business advice to a billionaire CEO. She should stop this now, confess, leave. But that voice in her head, the one that had gotten her a full scholarship to State, the one that made her professors say she had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, that voice whispered, "Answer him." "Who gets hurt?" Evelyn said quietly. Adrian's fingers stopped drumming. "Excuse me?" Evelyn felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she'd started now, and something told her that backing down would be worse than pushing forward. "You said the returns are exceptional, 37% over 5 years. That's really good. Almost too good." She took a breath. "In my experience, when something looks that perfect, it usually means someone's pain isn't being counted in the equation. So my first question would be, who gets hurt by this expansion, and are we pretending they don't exist to make the numbers work?" The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Adrian leaned forward slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just looked at her, really looked at her, and Evelyn fought the urge to fidget under that penetrating gaze. Then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. The ruthless CEO from the Forbes articles disappeared, and for just a second, Evelyn saw something else. A man who'd just heard something that surprised him, maybe even pleased him. 11 interviews, Adrian said softly. 11 people with Harvard MBAs and decades of experience. Not one of them asked that question. He pulled out a different folder, this one thicker, and slid it across the table to her. "This is the full proposal, not the summary we show investors. The actual data, including the parts we don't talk about at board meetings. I want you to spend 20 minutes with it. Then I want you to tell me what everyone else is too afraid to say." Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened the folder. This was wrong. This was so far beyond wrong that she didn't have words for it. She was looking at documents that were probably protected by so many ND, as that just touching them was illegal. She was deceiving a man who could destroy her with a single phone call. She was one revelation away from not just losing this fake interview, but potentially facing criminal charges. But she opened the folder anyway, because buried underneath all the fear and the panic and the absolute insanity of this situation, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, like her mind mattered, like the patterns she saw, the questions she asked, the way she thought about problems, like all of it actually meant something. The proposal was impressive on the surface. Meridian Global would partner with local firms in Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, providing consulting services for companies trying to modernize their operations. The revenue projections were solid, backed by market research and case studies. The risk assessment looked thorough. But Evelyn had learned something in her 3 years of cleaning office buildings. You learned more about a company from what they threw away than what they put in presentations. She'd spent countless nights reading discarded reports, forgotten memos, drafts that never made it to the final version. She'd learned to read between the lines, to spot the data that didn't quite add up, to notice when numbers were too clean, too perfect, too conveniently aligned. And this proposal, for all its impressive credentials, was too clean. The cost analysis assumed local labor at rates that seemed impossibly low. The timeline ignored cultural factors that would inevitably cause delays. The regulatory compliance section glossed over known corruption issues with a single sentence about navigating local business customs. The environmental impact assessment was one paragraph in a 100-page document. But what caught Evelyn's attention, what made her stomach turn, was buried in Appendix C, the supply chain analysis. Hidden in dense technical language and footnotes, the proposal outlined partnerships with manufacturers whose labor practices were documented but dismissed as within regional norms. There were mentions of efficiency optimizations that translated to 16-hour workdays, flexible workforce management that meant hiring people without contracts or benefits, and competitive local wages that were barely enough to survive on. The people who would make Meridian Global 37% richer were the same people who would work themselves to exhaustion for wages that would never let them escape poverty. And the proposal treated this as a feature, not a problem. Evelyn looked up from the folder to find Adrian watching her, his expression neutral, but his attention absolute. The 20 minutes had evaporated. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Well?" Adrian asked. "What's everyone too afraid to say?" Evelyn closed the folder carefully, buying herself a few seconds to organize thoughts that wanted to come out as an angry torrent. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edge of the table. "This proposal is brilliant," she said. "The market analysis is thorough, the financial projections are conservative enough to be credible, and the expansion strategy is exactly what investors want to hear. It checks every box. It's perfect." Adrian nodded slowly. But it's perfect because it deliberately ignores the cost of being perfect." Evelyn opened the folder again, finding the supply chain section. "These partnerships you're planning with manufacturers in Vietnam and Indonesia, they're not just cheap. They're cheap because the people working there are being systematically underpaid and overworked. The proposal calls it competitive local wages, but that's not analysis. That's justification." She felt her voice rising and forced it back down. "You asked who gets hurt. The answer is everyone who actually has to do the work that makes you 37% richer, and this proposal succeeds by pretending they don't exist." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't contemplative or surprised. It was sharp, dangerous, the kind of quiet that came before explosions. Adrian's expression hadn't changed, but something had shifted in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious proposal," Evelyn countered, then immediately regretted the edge in her voice. She was a cleaner pretending to be a consultant, and she'd just essentially accused a billionaire CEO of planning to exploit workers. This was beyond disaster. This was career suicide, except she didn't have a career to kill. But Adrian didn't look angry. He looked interested. "Keep going," he said quietly. Evelyn hesitated, then decided she'd already jumped off the cliff. Might as well see how deep the fall went. "The 37% return depends on maintaining these labor practices. But that's not sustainable. It's not even stable. You're building an expansion on a foundation that's designed to exploit people. And when, not if when, that foundation cracks, everything built on top of it comes down too. She pulled out the regulatory compliance section. You've got one paragraph about corruption and business customs, like it's a minor detail, but every region you're planning to enter has documented issues with bribery, forced labor, and environmental violations. Ignoring that doesn't make it go away. It just means you're choosing not to see it. And if we could see it? Adrian asked. If we factored in fair wages, proper working conditions, actual regulatory compliance, what happens to the 37%? It drops, Evelyn admitted. Maybe down to 15, maybe 20% over 5 years. Still profitable, but not exceptional. Not the kind of return that gets investors excited or makes headlines. So your advice is to make less money? It wasn't quite a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. My advice is to make money without pretending other people's suffering doesn't count. There's a difference between profit and exploitation. This proposal confuses the two. Adrian stood up abruptly, and Evelyn's heart lurched. This was it. The moment where he called security, where the charade ended, where she faced the consequences of this utterly insane decision to keep lying. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out over the city lights spread below like a carpet of stars. When he spoke, his voice was distant, almost contemplative. Do you know how many people have told me, to my face, that I'm wrong about something fundamental? He didn't wait for an answer. In the last 5 years? 3. One was my CFO, who quit 2 weeks later. One was a board member who I forced out in a restructure. And one was my ex-wife, right before she left. He turned back to face her, and Evelyn saw something in his expression that surprised her. Exhaustion that went bone deep, the kind that came from carrying weight for too long without anyone to help share the load. Everyone else tells me I'm brilliant, Adrian continued, that my instincts are perfect, that whatever I decide is the right call. Do you know how dangerous that is? How easy it is to start believing it? To surround yourself with people who never push back, never question, never dare to say you might be wrong? He walked back to the table but didn't sit down. You've been here less than an hour, and you've already told me my expansion plan is built on exploitation and willful ignorance. Either you're remarkably brave or remarkably stupid. Probably the second one, Evelyn said before she could stop herself. Adrian laughed, a real laugh, sharp and surprised. Probably both. He looked at her with renewed intensity. The labor practices you mentioned in Southeast Asia, the low wages, the long hours, how do you know about them? That's not common knowledge. That's research-level detail. Evelyn's mouth went dry. This was dangerous territory, where her knowledge revealed too much about who she actually was. I read a lot. Economic journals, mostly. Labor studies. There was a paper last year from the International Labor Organization about manufacturing conditions in developing economies, and some reporting from the Asia-Pacific Foundation about wage disparities and working conditions. It's not exactly hidden information, it's just information people choose not to look for. It was true, all of it. During her breaks, during the long, quiet hours of night shifts, Evelyn read, not romance novels or social media, but economic papers, industry reports, anything she could access through the public library's database. She read because it was the only part of her old life, the scholarship student who was going to change the world, that she could still hold on to. She just hadn't expected anyone to ever care that she read. Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. What's your background? He asked. Your resume said consulting, but you don't talk like most consultants I've met. Resumed. Right. The resume he thought he'd seen, for the interview that wasn't real, for the position she wasn't actually interviewing for. Evelyn made a split-second decision to stay as close to the truth as possible without revealing the whole disaster. I studied economics, didn't finish my degree. I've been working in various positions since then, learning where I can. Economics. Adrian nodded slowly. From where? State University. 3 semesters before. She let the sentence trail off, leaving the blank for him to fill with whatever assumption felt comfortable. Before what? Before I ran out of money and had to make a choice between theoretical knowledge and survival. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Turns out rent doesn't accept essays on market theory as payment. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not pity, but something that looked almost like recognition. I know that choice, he said quietly. Different circumstances, same impossible math. He paused. My first year of college, I worked 3 jobs to stay enrolled. One of them was janitorial staff at a hospital, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cleaning floors while everyone else was either sleeping or saving lives. You learn a lot about people when you're invisible to them. Evelyn looked up sharply, meeting his eyes. For a moment, the space between them felt less like CEO and pretend consultant, and more like 2 people who understood what it meant to exist in the margins of other people's important worlds. What did you learn? She asked quietly. That the people at the top rarely see the whole picture because the picture is built to hide the parts they don't want to see. Adrian sat back down, and this time when he looked at her, it wasn't as an interviewer assessing a candidate. It was something more honest, more direct. That the most dangerous thing in business isn't making the wrong decision. It's making decisions with incomplete information and thinking you have it all figured out. He tapped the proposal folder. Like this. This expansion plan has been in development for 8 months, cost us nearly $2 million in consulting fees to put together, and in 20 minutes, you found the flaw nobody else was willing to name. Maybe they saw it, Evelyn said. Maybe they just knew better than to say it out loud. Maybe, Adrian agreed. Which brings me to my next question. Why did you say it? It was a good question, a fair question, and one that Evelyn didn't have a safe answer to. Because the real answer was, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a cleaner who stumbled into something impossible, and I'm too terrified and too desperate and too tired of being invisible to walk away from the first time in 3 years that someone actually listened when I spoke. But she couldn't say that. So instead she said, because you asked for honesty. And I figured if I was going to crash and burn in an interview, I might as well do it spectacularly. Adrian smiled again, that slight curve that transformed his face. Well, you're definitely accomplishing that. He pulled out his phone, glanced at it, then set it face down on the table. It's almost midnight. I wasn't expecting this to go past 20 minutes, and we've been talking for nearly an hour. He paused, seeming to make a decision. I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't. I'm going to show you something that stays in this room. Understood? Evelyn nodded, her heart racing again. Adrian opened his laptop, a sleek device that probably cost more than Evelyn made in 6 months, and turned it to face her. The screen showed a complex dashboard with graphs, charts, and data streams that updated in real time. This is Meridian's actual operational metrics, not the clean version we show investors or put in quarterly reports. This is the raw data, every complaint, every delay, every problem that crops up across all our divisions. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes scanning the display. At first glance, it looked fine, healthy even. Green indicators outnumbered red ones. Efficiency metrics were strong. Client satisfaction scores were high. But then she noticed something odd. These complaint numbers, she said slowly, pointing to a graph in the lower right. They're trending down quarter over quarter. That should be good, but she looked closer at the data source. The volume of client interactions is actually increasing. More projects, more clients, more employees. So statistically, you should be seeing more complaints just from increased volume, but instead they're dropping. That's not improvement. That's suppression, Adrian finished. Someone is filtering complaints before they reach this dashboard, making the data look cleaner than it is. Evelyn looked up at him. How long have you known? I suspected it 3 months ago. Confirmed it 2 weeks ago when I cross-referenced this against direct client feedback. His expression was grim. Someone in operations has been systematically burying problems to make their department look more efficient, and I can't figure out who because everyone involved swears the numbers are accurate. It's not just one person, Evelyn said, studying the dashboard more carefully. Look at the pattern. The suppression is too consistent across different project types, different client sectors. If it was one manager protecting their territory, you'd see variation. This is systematic. It's cultural. Adrian went very still. Explain. Evelyn pointed to different sections of the dashboard. Here. Client complaints dropped sharply starting in Q2, but look at employee survey data from the same period. She found the relevant section. Job satisfaction is down. Stress metrics are up. People are working longer hours but reporting fewer issues. That's not because there are fewer issues. It's because they've learned that reporting issues gets them punished, not rewarded. Jesus, Adrian muttered, running a hand through his hair. You're right. I've been looking for one bad actor, but it's the whole system. People aren't hiding problems because they're malicious. They're hiding problems because we've accidentally created a culture where honesty is a liability. Not accidentally, Evelyn said quietly. You said it yourself. Everyone tells you you're brilliant, that your decisions are perfect. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when the culture rewards agreeing with power and punishes questioning it. And once that culture sets in, it doesn't matter what you say you want. People will tell you what keeps them safe, not what's true. Adrian looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been reassessment. Evelyn couldn't quite tell. You know, he said slowly, I've spent the last 8 months interviewing people to help fix problems like this. Strategic advisors, organizational consultants, culture experts. Every single one of them told me what I needed to change about my leadership style, or my communication strategy, or my management approach. He paused. You're the first person who told me the problem isn't me. It's that I've built a system where people are afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Evelyn pointed out. You built the system. That means fixing it is still your responsibility. Fair point, Adrian closed the laptop. Which brings me back to the expansion proposal. If we're operating in a culture where problems get hidden instead of solved, and we add the complexity of international operations with all the ethical landmines you identified, what happens? Evelyn didn't have to think about it. Disaster. Not immediately, maybe not even in the first year, but eventually something will go wrong. A labor violation will get exposed, or a regulatory issue will blow up, or someone will get hurt badly enough that it can't be covered up. And when it happens, it won't just be a problem. It'll be a scandal, because it'll come out that all the warning signs were there and everyone ignored them. The company doesn't just lose money, it loses credibility, maybe permanently. The room fell silent again. Outside the glass walls, the city continued its never-sleeping hum, cars on distant streets, lights in other buildings where other people were working late, making decisions, building futures that might be just as flawed as this one. Adrian stood up and walked to the window again, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. 5 years ago, my wife, ex-wife, told me I was becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone who treated people like data points instead of humans. I told her she didn't understand business, that she was being emotional, that success required hard choices. He turned to face Evelyn. She left 3 months later, took our daughter. Now I see Emma every other weekend, and she barely looks at me when I walk in the room, because even at 7 years old, she can tell the difference between a father and someone who schedules parenting like a business meeting. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. I tell myself it's worth it, Adrian continued. The sacrifice, the missed moments, the relationships that fall apart. I tell myself I'm building something important, something that matters. But lately I've been wondering, important to who? Mattering in what way? He gestured to the proposal folder still sitting on the table. That expansion plan could make me even richer. It could cement Meridian's position as a global leader. It could make headlines and impress investors and prove that I'm exactly as brilliant as everyone says I am. But if it's built on the backs of people who are being exploited, if it requires me to not see the suffering it causes, then what the hell am I actually building? Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. A familiar ache that came from recognizing your own pain in someone else's story. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know what you're not building. You're not building something you'd be proud to explain to your daughter. Adrian flinched just slightly, but Evelyn saw it. Sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have. No. Adrian cut her off, his voice firm. You're right. Emma asked me last month what I do for work. I spent 20 minutes explaining consulting and market strategy and business development, and by the end, she looked at me and said, "But what do you do? Like, what do you make better?" And he shook his head. I didn't have an answer. I make money. I make companies more efficient. But what do I actually make better? Before Evelyn could respond, the conference room door opened. A woman in her mid-50s stood in the doorway, wearing a Meridian security badge, and an expression of professional concern that didn't quite hide her confusion. Her eyes moved from Adrian to Evelyn and back again. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "I apologize for the interruption. There's been a situation. I need to speak with you." Adrian frowned. "Can it wait?" "I'm in the middle of—" "I'm afraid not, sir." The woman's gaze moved to Evelyn, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or suspicion. "It concerns the interview." "What about it?" The woman stepped fully into the room, and Evelyn felt the temperature drop about 10 degrees. "Sir, I've been trying to reach you for the past hour. The candidate for the senior analyst position, the actual candidate, called to reschedule. She missed her flight from Boston. The interview was supposed to start at 11 p.m., but given the circumstances, we agreed to postpone until tomorrow." Evelyn watched Adrian process this information, watched the confusion cross his face, followed by understanding, followed by something that might have been anger or disappointment or both. "Then who—" Adrian began, then stopped as he turned to look at Evelyn. The woman, Sarah Chen, according to her badge, head of security, looked at Evelyn too, really looked at her for the first time. Her eyes moved from Evelyn's face to her clothes, comfortable but worn, definitely not interview attire, to her hands, where a faint chemical smell still lingered from cleaning products, to the cleaning cart visible just outside the conference room door. "Oh my God," Sarah said quietly, "you're not the candidate. You're a contractor." The words hung in the air like an executioner's verdict. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. The moment where everything she'd been pretending collapsed into the truth she couldn't outrun anymore. She wasn't a consultant or an analyst or someone qualified to give a billionaire CEO advice on international expansion. She was a cleaner who'd lied her way into a conversation she had no business being part of. Evelyn started, but her voice failed. What could she possibly say? What explanation could make this anything other than what it was? Deception, fraud, a desperate mistake that had spiraled completely out of control? Adrian's expression was unreadable. He looked at Evelyn, then at Sarah, then back at Evelyn. "You're a cleaner," he said flatly. It wasn't a question, but Evelyn nodded anyway, her throat too tight to speak. "And when I asked if you were here for the interview—" "I should have corrected you," Evelyn managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have explained immediately. I'm so sorry. I wasn't trying to—" The words tangled in her throat. What wasn't she trying to do? Deceive him? She'd literally done exactly that for the past hour. Sarah stepped forward, her voice professional but cold. "Mr. Cole, I'll need to file a security report. Unauthorized access to confidential materials, misrepresentation, potential industrial espionage." "She didn't misrepresent anything," Adrian interrupted, his voice sharp. "I made an assumption. She didn't correct me, but she didn't lie." "Sir, with all due respect, she allowed you to believe—" "I know what she allowed me to believe, Sarah." Adrian's tone left no room for argument. "And I know what I showed her and what we discussed. But before we start talking about security breaches and reports, I want to understand what actually happened here." He turned to Evelyn, and the look in his eyes was different now. Not angry exactly, but intense in a way that made her want to disappear into the floor. "Why didn't you correct me?" It was the same question he'd asked earlier, but this time it meant something completely different. Evelyn took a shaky breath. She could lie again, make excuses, try to minimize what she'd done. But she was so tired of pretending, and the truth was going to come out anyway. "Because for the first time in 3 years," she said quietly, "someone was listening to me, not looking through me, not dismissing me, not treating me like I was invisible. You asked my opinion like it mattered, like what I thought could actually make a difference. And I know that doesn't justify lying to you. I know it was wrong. But in that moment, when you asked me to stay, to tell you the truth about that proposal, I forgot that people like me aren't supposed to be in rooms like this." The silence that followed felt like drowning. Sarah looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting to intervene but held back by Adrian's raised hand. Adrian studied Evelyn with an expression she couldn't read. "People like you," he repeated slowly. "What does that mean?" "People who clean your floors," Evelyn said, and she couldn't keep the bitterness entirely out of her voice. "People who are here when you're not, who see everything but don't matter, who understand how the building works better than most executives, but whose opinions don't count because we're not supposed to have opinions. People who had dreams once, but had to trade them for survival. She stood up, her legs shaking. I'm sorry I wasted your time. I'll turn in my contractor badge and leave. You won't see me again. She moved toward the door, but Adrian's voice stopped her. Wait. Evelyn turned back reluctantly. Adrian was still sitting at the table, looking at her with that same intense focus that had started this whole impossible conversation. Before you go, he said quietly, I need you to answer one more question. And I need the truth, the real truth, not what you think I want to hear. Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't sure she had any truths left to give. Everything you said tonight, about the expansion proposal, about the labor practices, about the culture of hiding problems, was that real? Did you mean it, or were you just telling me what you thought a consultant would say? It was a fair question, a necessary question, and Evelyn was so far past the point of strategic lying that the truth came out without filter. I meant every word, she said. I've been cleaning office buildings for 3 years, Mr. Cole. You know what I've learned in that time? I've learned that the people at the bottom see things the people at the top never notice. I've learned that the trash bins tell you more about a company's real priorities than the mission statement on the wall. I've learned that the night janitor knows which departments are in crisis because we're the ones cleaning up their stress-eating wrappers and energy drink cans at 3 a.m. She took a breath, steadying herself. So yes, I meant it. I meant it when I said your expansion plan is built on exploitation. I meant it when I said your culture punishes honesty. I meant it when I said you're building something you couldn't explain to your daughter without feeling ashamed. I meant every single word, because I've spent 3 years being invisible in buildings like this one, and invisible people see everything. The room was absolutely silent. Then Adrian stood up, and Evelyn braced herself for whatever was coming. Security, lawyers, police, some combination of all three. But Adrian didn't move toward the door. Instead, he turned to Sarah. No security report, he said. Sarah's eyes widened. Sir, the protocols... I'm aware of the protocols, but this wasn't a security breach. It was a scheduling error that led to an unorthodox conversation. Nothing confidential left this room. No harm was done. He paused. In fact, I'd argue the opposite. This conversation was more valuable than any interview I've conducted in the past 8 months. Mr. Cole, that's my decision, Sarah. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, but I'll handle it from here. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Adrian's expression stopped her. She gave a tight nod. As you wish, sir, but I'll need to note the scheduling error in the system. Of course, thank you. Sarah left, but not before giving Evelyn one last look that clearly said, I'll be watching you. When the door closed, Adrian turned back to Evelyn. You should sit down. I should leave, Evelyn countered. Probably, Adrian agreed, but sit down anyway. Evelyn sat, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Adrian remained standing, his hands in his pockets, looking more uncertain than she'd seen him all night. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Can you do that? Evelyn nodded. How long have you been cleaning the executive floors? The question surprised her. About 6 months. Before that, I was on the lower levels, accounting, our middle management. And in those 6 months, what have you seen? Not tonight, not in this conversation, but in general, as someone who's invisible in this building, what have you seen that someone should probably know about? Evelyn hesitated. This felt like dangerous territory, like she was being asked to inform on people, to betray the invisible code of the service workers who kept quiet about what they observed. But then she remembered what she'd said to Adrian about the expansion proposal. The people at the bottom often pay the price for success at the top. And she realized that staying silent didn't protect anyone. It just let broken systems keep breaking people. I've seen department heads stay late 3 nights a week to fix mistakes their teams are too afraid to report during the day, Evelyn said slowly. I've seen junior analysts crying in bathroom stalls because they're working 80-hour weeks and can't keep up. I've seen evidence of expense fraud being casually hidden in trash bins, like it's so normal nobody even thinks to shred the documents properly. I've seen managers blame their assistants for errors that show up in their own deleted drafts. She paused. And I've seen good people, talented people, give up and leave because they can't survive in a culture where asking for help means admitting weakness. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each example. Here's what I haven't seen, Evelyn continued. I haven't seen anyone report these problems through proper channels. Not because the channels don't exist, but because everyone knows that reporting problems makes you the problem. The system isn't broken because nobody cares. It's broken because caring is a liability. And you know all this from cleaning floors. I know it because I'm there when people think nobody's watching, when the performance is over and the truth comes out. Evelyn met his eyes. You wanted to know why I didn't correct you when you thought I was a consultant. The real reason? Because consultants come in, observe for a few weeks, write reports based on interviews where everyone performs for them, and leave with recommendations that sound good but miss what's actually happening. I've watched it happen 4 times in the past 6 months alone. They never see what I see because nobody performs for the cleaning staff. We're not important enough to lie to. Adrian walked slowly back to his chair and sat down heavily, like the weight of what she was saying had physical mass. For a long moment, he just sat there, looking at the proposal folder, the laptop, the conference room that had witnessed this entire impossible night. Then he looked up at her, and in his eyes, Evelyn saw something that looked like exhaustion mixed with something else. Maybe relief. Maybe resignation. Maybe just the recognition of a problem too big to keep ignoring. I built this, he said quietly. Not alone, not intentionally, but I built it. Every policy I approved, every manager I promoted, every time I rewarded results without asking about the cost, I built this culture piece by piece. And the worst part is, I genuinely didn't see it. I thought I was building excellence. Turns out I was building a machine that eats people and calls it efficiency. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. You want to know something ironic? That expansion proposal you eviscerated, I had concerns about it too. The same concerns you raised, actually. But every advisor I consulted, every expert I hired, they all said I was overthinking it, being too cautious, letting perfect be the enemy of good. And I believe them because they're the experts, right? They have the degrees and the credentials and the experience. He laughed bitterly. Meanwhile, the person who actually sees the truth clearly is someone I wouldn't have listened to if you'd told me who you really were at the start of this conversation. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she stayed quiet. Adrian stopped pacing and looked at her directly. I'm going to make you an offer, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond. Can you do that? Evelyn's heart started racing again. Okay. You're right that you don't belong in this room. Not because you're not smart enough or qualified enough, but because you're working a job that doesn't use even a fraction of what you're capable of. That's a waste of your talent, your education, your potential. He paused. I can't undo the fact that you had to drop out of college, or that you've spent 3 years invisible in a building where you should have been valued, but I can do something about what happens next. He picked up his phone, typed something quickly, then set it down. I'm going to have HR create a position, Junior Analyst Strategic Operations. It's not senior, it's not glamorous, but it's a real job with a real salary and benefits. You'll work with me directly on the audit I'm about to launch into every goddamn thing you just described. And if you're half as good at analyzing problems in daylight as you are at midnight, you'll be promoted within 6 months. Evelyn stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to finish what you started tonight. To take everything you've observed and turn it into something that actually fixes the broken systems you've been documenting. He met her eyes. But I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. The moment I launch this audit, people are going to push back. Hard. Powerful people who benefit from the current system are going to fight to protect it. And if you're working with me on this, you're going to be in the crossfire. It won't be safe, it won't be easy, and it definitely won't make you popular. Why? Evelyn asked. Why me? You don't even know if I can do the actual work. Tonight was just talking. That's not the same as tonight you looked at an 8-month, $2 million proposal and found the critical flaw in 20 minutes. You identified systemic cultural problems that I've been trying to diagnose for months. You told a billionaire CEO that his business plan was morally bankrupt, even though you had every reason to believe it would get you thrown out of the building. Adrian's voice was quiet but intense. I don't need someone who can do the work. I can hire 1,000 people who can do the work. What I need is someone who can see what's actually happening and has the courage to say it out loud, even when it's dangerous. And tonight, you proved you're that person." Evelyn felt tears prickling at her eyes and furiously blinked them back. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. You didn't stumble into a CEO's conference room and walk out with a job offer that could change your entire life, except apparently you did. "I need time," she said, "to think about it, to—" "Take the time," Adrian interrupted gently. "This is a big decision. Think it through. Talk to people you trust. Consider the risks and the reality of what I'm offering." He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "That's my direct number, not my assistant, not a scheduling line. Me. When you've made your decision, call that number. Or don't. The offer stands for 1 week. Then I need an answer." Evelyn took the card with trembling fingers. It was heavy stock, probably ridiculously expensive, with Adrian's name embossed in subtle silver. On the back, he'd written a phone number in neat, precise handwriting. She looked up at him, this man who'd spent the last hour talking to her like she mattered, like her thoughts had value, like she was more than just the invisible person who cleaned his conference rooms. "I have one condition," Adrian said. "If you take this job, you have to promise me something." "What?" "Never stop being the person who walked into this room tonight. Never stop questioning the easy answers or challenging the comfortable lies. Never become one of the people who tells me what I want to hear instead of what I need to know." He paused. "I'm offering you a job, but what I actually need is someone who'll keep me honest. Someone who'll remember why we're doing this when I start to forget. Can you promise me that?" Evelyn thought about the past 3 years, about being invisible, unheard, dismissed, about watching problems get buried and people get broken and systems grind on unchanged, about all the time she'd seen something wrong and said nothing because nobody would listen anyway. "I can promise that," she said quietly. Adrian nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "Good." He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 1 in the morning. "You should go home. Get some sleep. Think about this without the adrenaline and the surreal midnight conversation clouding your judgment." Evelyn stood, her legs still slightly shaky. As she moved toward the door, she paused, turning back. "Mr. Cole?" "Adrian," he corrected. "If we're going to work together, we're going to work together." "Adrian," Evelyn amended, "that expansion proposal. What are you going to do about it?" Adrian looked at the folder still sitting on the table, containing the plan that represented months of work and millions in potential profit. "I'm going to do what you suggested, scrap it and start over. Build something I could explain to Emma without feeling ashamed." He smiled slightly. "It's going to cost us the 37% return and probably piss off the board, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't even realized was there. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Adrian replied. "We haven't fixed anything. We've just acknowledged it's broken. The hard part comes next." Evelyn nodded and left the conference room, collecting her cleaning cart from where it waited in the hall like evidence of a life she wasn't sure she was ready to leave behind. As she pushed the cart toward the elevator, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened, she didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows near the operations suite. Clara Vaughn, director of operations, stood perfectly still, her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. She'd heard enough. And tomorrow, the real trouble would begin. The elevator doors closed behind Evelyn, sealing her into the small chrome box that would carry her back down to the world where she belonged. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal, pale, exhausted, eyes too wide with shock and possibility and terror, all mixed together into something she couldn't name. Her hands were still shaking. The business card felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Adrian Cole's private number. A job offer that could change everything. A chance to stop being invisible. The elevator descended, floor numbers ticking down like a countdown to reality. 37, 36, 35. With each floor, the surreal midnight conversation felt more like a dream, something that couldn't possibly have happened to someone like her. But it had happened, and somewhere above her, Adrian Cole was probably already moving on to the next crisis, the next decision, the next impossible problem that needed solving. While she was standing in an elevator with a cleaning cart, trying to figure out if she'd just been handed a miracle or a disaster. The doors opened on the ground floor. Marcus, her supervisor, was waiting by the security desk, his expression somewhere between annoyed and concerned. "There you are," he said, checking his watch. "You've been up there for almost 2 hours. I got a call from building security saying there was some kind of situation on 37. You okay?" Evelyn forced her voice to work. "I'm fine, just scheduling confusion. It's handled." Marcus studied her with the practiced eye of someone who'd managed night crews for 15 years and could spot trouble before it fully materialized. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What really happened up there?" "Nothing. Really, I just..." Evelyn trailed off, realizing she had no idea how to explain any of this. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot. If someone offered you a completely different job, something that could change your whole life but also might be a terrible idea, would you take it?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific for 3 in the morning. Someone offer you something up there?" "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically," Marcus repeated, clearly not believing her for a second. "Well, hypothetically, I'd say that life-changing opportunities don't come around often for people like us. And if you get offered one, you'd be a fool not to at least consider it seriously." He paused. "But I'd also say that if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So you better make damn sure you know what you're walking into before you say yes to anything." Evelyn nodded slowly. It was good advice, practical advice, the kind of advice she should probably listen to. "Go home," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Get some sleep. Whatever this hypothetical decision is, it'll still be there in the morning." But as Evelyn pushed her cart toward the service exit, she knew sleep wasn't going to happen tonight. Her mind was already spinning, analyzing, trying to calculate risks and possibilities with the same intensity she'd brought to Adrian's expansion proposal. She didn't notice Clara Vaughn watching from the lobby shadows, phone already pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent as she made a call that would set everything in motion. The next morning arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Evelyn sat in her tiny apartment, a studio in a building where the heat worked intermittently and the neighbors played music at volumes that suggested they were either deaf or actively hostile, staring at Adrian's business card like it might provide answers through sheer force of concentration. She hadn't slept. How could she? Her mind kept replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every moment, looking for the trap she must have missed. Because people like Adrian Cole didn't just hand out job offers to cleaning staff who'd lied their way into his conference room. That wasn't how the world worked, except he had. And now she had to decide what to do about it. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother in Ohio. "Hospital bills came, can you help this month?" Evelyn closed her eyes. Her mother had been sick for 2 years. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but chronic, expensive, the kind of illness that ate through savings and insurance coverage and left nothing but debt in its wake. Evelyn sent what she could, which was never enough, which left her own bills unpaid and her own life in a constant state of barely managed crisis. A junior analyst position would mean real money. Health insurance. The ability to help her mother without choosing between rent and medicine. But it would also mean stepping into a world where she didn't belong, where her lack of credentials would be obvious, where one mistake could prove that Adrian's faith in her was misplaced. Before she could spiral further into anxiety, her phone rang. Unknown number. Evelyn's heart jumped. Was it Adrian? Had he changed his mind? Realized the insanity of what he'd offered? She answered. "Hello? Evelyn Parker?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Yes?" "This is Jennifer Chen from Meridian Global HR. Mr. Cole asked me to reach out regarding a potential position in strategic operations. Do you have a moment to discuss the details?" Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. Yes, I have a moment." "Excellent. Mr. Cole has requested we create a junior analyst position with an immediate start date, pending your acceptance. The salary would be $75,000 annually with full benefits, including health insurance, 401k matching, and educational assistance. There would be a 6-month probationary period, after which we'd review for potential advancement." Jennifer paused. "I understand this is somewhat unusual circumstances, but Mr. Cole was quite insistent. Are you interested in moving forward?" $75,000. Evelyn made $28,000 as a cleaner. The difference wasn't just money. It was breathing room. It was possibilities. It was the chance to stop drowning. "Yes," Evelyn heard herself say, "I'm interested." "Wonderful. I'll email you the preliminary paperwork. We'd like to start the onboarding process immediately, with a target start date of next Monday. Does that work for your schedule?" Monday. 5 days away. 5 days to completely upend her entire life. "That works," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Perfect. Welcome to Meridian Global, Miss Parker. I think you'll find it's an exciting place to build a career." After Jennifer hung up, Evelyn sat in silence, staring at her phone. It was real. It was actually happening. She'd just accepted a job offer that would change everything. She should have felt excited, grateful, relieved. Instead, she felt terrified. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered, "You don't belong there, and everyone's going to know it." What Evelyn didn't know, couldn't know, sitting in her apartment trying to process the impossible turn her life had just taken, was that 3 miles away, in Meridian Global's operations suite, Clara Vaughn was orchestrating a very different kind of response. Clara had built her career on control. 23 years at Meridian, rising from junior project manager to director of operations through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an almost preternatural ability to anticipate problems before they became crises. She didn't get rattled, she didn't make mistakes, and she absolutely didn't tolerate threats to the carefully constructed systems that kept the company running smoothly. And Evelyn Parker was a threat. Not because of what she'd done, sneaking into a conference room, talking to the CEO, those were minor infractions easily handled. No, Evelyn was a threat because of what she represented. Chaos, unpredictability, someone from outside the established order who'd somehow gotten the CEO's attention without going through proper channels. Clara didn't operate on emotion. She operated on strategy. And the strategy here was clear. Eliminate the threat before it could take root. She'd already made 3 calls before sunrise. The first to her counterpart in HR, planting seeds of concern about proper vetting procedures and background checks. The second to legal, asking pointed questions about liability and unauthorized access to confidential materials. The third to an old friend in corporate security, requesting a full audit of last night's events. By the time Evelyn was accepting Jennifer's call, Clara was already building a case. "Tell me again exactly what happened," Clara said to Sarah Chen, who sat across from her desk looking uncomfortable in the morning light. Sarah, who'd been hoping this situation would quietly disappear, sighed. Mr. Cole was in conference room 3701, apparently waiting for an interview candidate who'd been delayed. Miss Parker, a contract cleaner, arrived due to a scheduling error. Mr. Cole mistook her for the candidate. They had a conversation. When I discovered the mix-up, I informed Mr. Cole. He chose not to file a security report. "He chose not to file a report," Clara repeated slowly. Despite the fact that a contractor had unauthorized access to confidential materials, Mr. Cole felt no breach had occurred. Mr. Cole's feelings are not security protocol. Clara's voice was sharp. "You should have filed the report regardless of his preference. That's your job." Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, Clara, my job is to protect the company's interests. And sometimes that means understanding when protocol serves those interests and when it doesn't. Mr. Cole made a judgment call. Mr. Cole is not infallible, no matter how much we pretend otherwise." Clara stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. "He's brilliant, yes, but he's also impulsive when something catches his interest. I've watched him elevate people based on gut instinct before, and I've watched those same people crash and burn when reality doesn't match his intuition. You think that's what this is?" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that Adrian is going through something. The divorce, the distance from his daughter, the pressure from the board. He's not in the headspace to make sound decisions about personnel. And this girl, this cleaner who somehow impressed him in the middle of the night." She shook her head. "It's not about whether she's smart or talented. It's about whether she's equipped to operate at this level, in this environment, with this much at stake. And I'm concerned that Adrian's letting emotion override judgment." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You're saying we should stop this." "I'm saying we should do our due diligence, background check, verification of credentials, proper vetting. If she's everything Adrian thinks she is, then fine. She'll pass with flying colors, and we'll all sleep better knowing we followed protocol." Clara turned back to face Sarah. But if there are red flags we're ignoring because the CEO had an interesting midnight conversation, then we're doing the company a disservice by not investigating thoroughly. It was a reasonable argument. Logical. Exactly the kind of cautious, protocol-driven thinking that had made Clara invaluable to Meridian's operations. It was also a smokescreen, because what Clara didn't say, what she would never say out loud, was that Evelyn Parker represented something far more dangerous than just a personnel risk. She represented a crack in the carefully constructed facade that Clara had spent years building, the one that kept uncomfortable truths buried and made her department look efficient, effective, and problem-free. Clara had been in that hallway last night. She'd heard enough of the conversation to know that Evelyn had talked about buried complaints, hidden problems, a culture that punished honesty. She'd heard Adrian promise an audit. And if that audit happened, if someone started pulling threads to see what unraveled, Clara's entire operation was at risk. Not because she'd done anything illegal, Clara was too smart for that, but because efficiency metrics that looked impressive on paper often involved shortcuts that didn't survive close scrutiny, complaints that were resolved internally to avoid escalation, reports that emphasized successes and minimized failures. A system that worked beautifully as long as nobody looked too closely at how it actually functioned. Evelyn Parker, with her outsider perspective and her apparent immunity to the unwritten rules about what you did and didn't say to Adrian Cole, could destroy all of that. So Clara would do what she always did: protect the system, protect her department, protect the carefully maintained order that kept Meridian running smoothly, even if it meant destroying someone who didn't deserve it. "I'll make some calls," Sarah said finally, though she looked uneasy about it. "See what we can find." "Thank you," Clara said warmly. "I know this feels excessive, but we're protecting Adrian as much as the company. He'll understand that eventually." After Sarah left, Clara sat back down at her desk and opened her laptop. She had work to do, people to talk to, a narrative to construct that would make removing Evelyn Parker seem not like retaliation, but like responsible corporate governance. She was very good at her job. And by the end of this day, Evelyn wouldn't just lose the opportunity Adrian had offered. She'd lose everything. Evelyn spent the weekend in a fog of anxiety and preparation. She researched junior analyst positions, watched YouTube videos about corporate culture, bought 2 professional outfits from a thrift store that consumed most of her grocery budget for the month. She practiced introducing herself in the bathroom mirror, trying to sound confident instead of terrified. She also called her mother. "A job?" her mother said, her voice brightening in a way Evelyn hadn't heard in months. "Sweetheart, that's wonderful. What kind of job?" "Business analyst. It's at a good company. The pay is better. A lot better." "Oh, Evelyn." Her mother's voice cracked slightly. "I'm so proud of you. I knew cleaning was just temporary, that you were meant for more." "Mom," Evelyn interrupted gently, "there's something I need to tell you about how I got this job." She explained it all: the scheduling error, the mistaken identity, the conversation that should never have happened. She expected her mother to be shocked, maybe disappointed in the deception. Instead, her mother laughed. "What?" Evelyn said, confused. "You spent an hour talking to a CEO and convinced him you were worth hiring even after he found out you'd been lying to him?" Her mother was still laughing, the sound thin but genuine. "Evie, that's not luck, that's talent. You've always been able to see things other people miss. Ask questions nobody else thinks to ask. The only difference between you and the people who get hired for those jobs is that they had parents who could afford to keep them in school." Her voice softened. "Don't you dare feel guilty for taking an opportunity that should have been yours in the first place." Evelyn felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I'm scared, Mom. What if I can't do it? What if I prove that he made a mistake?" "Then you'll learn and get better," her mother said firmly. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to show them exactly what I've always known, that my daughter is brilliant, and the only thing holding her back was circumstances, not capability." After they hung up, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not confidence exactly, but something close to it. A quiet determination that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything feel possible. Evelyn stood outside Meridian Global at 8:47 a.m., wearing one of her thrift store outfits, a navy blazer and gray slacks that were slightly too big but passable, and trying to convince her hands to stop shaking. She'd been inside this building hundreds of times, but always through the service entrance, always wearing a uniform, always invisible. Today she walked through the front doors. The lobby was different in daylight, filled with people in expensive suits carrying expensive coffee, moving with the purposeful stride of those who belonged. Evelyn approached the security desk, where a guard she'd seen 1,000 times looked at her without recognition. "I'm here for onboarding," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "HR department." The guard checked his computer. "Name?" "Evelyn Parker." He scanned the screen, frowned, checked again. "I don't see you on the list." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "There must be a mistake. Jennifer Chen from HR called me. I'm supposed to start today." "Let me call up." The guard picked up his phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up looking confused. "They're saying they don't have any record of a start date for you." "That's impossible. I spoke to her on Thursday. She sent me paperwork." Evelyn pulled out her phone, showing him the email confirmation. The guard looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I can only go by what's in the system, and you're not in the system." "Then can you call Jennifer again or someone in HR? There's obviously been a mistake." "I'll need you to step aside," the guard said, not unkindly. "There are other people waiting." Evelyn moved to the side, her heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. It was a mistake, obviously a mistake, just a computer error or an administrative oversight. She'd call Jennifer, get it sorted out, everything would be fine. She pulled up Jennifer's number and called. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "Jennifer, this is Evelyn Parker. I'm in the lobby for my first day, but security is saying I'm not in the system. Could you call me back? I'm sure it's just a mix-up, but I want to make sure everything's set for today." She hung up and waited. 5 minutes? 10 minutes. 15. No callback. Evelyn tried calling HR's main line. After being transferred twice, she ended up with someone who had no idea who she was or why she was calling. "Let me transfer you to Jennifer Chen's assistant," the woman said. "Thank you." But the line went dead before the transfer completed. Evelyn stood in the lobby, watching people flow past her like water around a stone, and felt the first cold tendrils of real fear starting to curl around her chest. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had erased her. She pulled out Adrian's business card, the one with his private number written on the back. Her finger hovered over the call button. She could call him right now, explain what was happening, ask for help. But what if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd realized the mistake he'd made, and this was his way of quietly backing out? Calling him would just make everything worse, force him to reject her directly instead of letting this administrative disappearing act do the work for him. Evelyn put the phone away. She wouldn't beg. If this opportunity was being taken away, she'd at least leave with her dignity intact. She turned toward the exit, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall in public. She didn't see Adrian step out of the elevator 30 feet away, coffee in hand, heading for a morning meeting. Didn't see him stop mid-stride when he spotted her in the lobby, recognition followed by confusion crossing his face. Didn't see him change direction, walking toward her with purpose. "Evelyn?" She spun around and Adrian saw immediately that something was wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes too bright, her whole posture radiating barely controlled panic. "What are you doing in the lobby?" Adrian asked. "I thought you'd be up in—" He stopped as realization hit. "You're not in the system." It wasn't a question. Evelyn shook her head, not trusting her voice. Adrian's expression went from confused to cold in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled out his phone and dialed, his jaw tight. "Jennifer? Adrian Cole. Why isn't Evelyn Parker in the system for today's start date?" He listened for a moment, and Evelyn watched his face darken. "I see. And who authorized that delay?" Another pause. "Clara. Of course. Cancel my 9 o'clock. I'll be in operations." He hung up and looked at Evelyn with something that might have been apology or might have been anger. She couldn't quite tell. "Come with me." "Mr. Cole, I don't want to cause problems." "Adrian," he corrected automatically. "And you're not causing problems. Someone else is, and we're about to solve it." He didn't wait for her to agree, just started walking toward the elevators with the kind of purposeful stride that made people instinctively move out of his way. Evelyn hurried to keep up, very aware of the stares they were attracting. The CEO and the woman in the too big blazer, who clearly didn't belong. They rode the elevator in silence to the 23rd floor, where operations was housed. Adrian walked straight past the receptionist, who started to protest, then wisely stayed quiet when she saw his expression. Clara Vaughn's office was at the end of a hallway lined with glass-walled conference rooms. Through the windows, Evelyn could see the operations team at work, analysts bent over computers, managers in meetings, the well-oiled machine of corporate efficiency. Adrian didn't knock. He opened Clara's door and walked in like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. Clara looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from surprise to carefully neutral professionalism in less than a second. "Adrian, I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. "Want to explain why Evelyn Parker's start date was delayed indefinitely without my knowledge or approval?" Clara stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with practiced calm. "I was going to brief you this morning. We have some concerns about the vetting process that need to be addressed before we can proceed with onboarding." "What concerns?" "Standard due diligence, background verification, credential checks, proper security clearance given the sensitive nature of the work you've indicated she'll be doing." Clara's voice was perfectly reasonable, perfectly professional. "We want to make sure we're following protocol." "Protocol?" Adrian repeated. "You're telling me that a junior analyst position, the same level we hire dozens of people for every quarter with minimal vetting, suddenly requires additional security clearance?" Given the unusual circumstances of Ms. Parker's introduction to the company, we felt additional caution was warranted. Clara's gaze flicked to Evelyn, standing just inside the doorway. "Surely you understand the liability concerns." "What I understand," Adrian said, his voice still that dangerous quiet, "is that I gave HR explicit instructions to process Evelyn's onboarding immediately. And somehow, those instructions were countermanded without my knowledge. By you." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm protecting the company's interests, Adrian. That's my job. Your job is to run operations efficiently, not to override executive decisions you personally disagree with." Adrian stepped closer to Clara's desk. "Let me be very clear. Evelyn Parker will be starting today as originally planned. You will personally ensure that HR processes her onboarding within the next 2 hours. And if I find out that you've created any additional obstacles to her employment, we're going to have a very different conversation about who's protecting the company's interests." The air in the office felt electric, charged with tension that made Evelyn want to disappear into the floor. This was worse than not getting the job. This was being the cause of conflict between two powerful people, being the excuse for a power struggle she didn't understand and couldn't control. Clara's expression remained perfectly composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or calculation. "Of course. I'll call Jennifer myself and make sure everything is processed immediately." She paused. "But Adrian, I do think we should discuss my concerns privately. There are matters regarding last week's incident that need to be addressed." "Schedule something with my assistant," Adrian said dismissively. "Right now, you have onboarding to facilitate." He turned and walked out, Evelyn scrambling to follow. They made it back to the elevator before Adrian's carefully controlled composure cracked slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, pressing the button for the executive floor. "That shouldn't have happened. Clara's protective of her territory, but this was out of line." "She's right, though," Evelyn said quietly, "about the vetting, about me being a risk. I lied to you. I had access to confidential materials. I'm not qualified for this job by any normal measure." "Stop." Adrian turned to face her fully. "You want to know what Clara's really concerned about? It's not vetting or protocols or security. It's control. She's built operations into a fortress where she decides who gets in and who doesn't, what information flows up and what gets buried. And you're a threat to that because you came in through a different door, one she doesn't control." He paused. "The audit I mentioned starting, the one to investigate the cultural problems you identified. Clara knows it's going to expose things she doesn't want exposed, so she's trying to eliminate the catalyst before the reaction can start." The elevator doors opened on the 37th floor. Adrian led her to a small office, not lavish but professional, with a desk, computer, and window view of the city. "This is yours," Adrian said. "For now. We'll get you properly set up once HR finishes the paperwork Clara's suddenly so concerned about completing." He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. My assistant will bring you a temporary badge and get you access to the systems you'll need. Take today to get oriented. Tomorrow we start the real work. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the office, her office, feeling like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. Adrian, I appreciate what you're doing, but maybe Clara's right. Maybe this is happening too fast. Maybe I'm not. Do you know what the difference is between people who succeed and people who don't? Adrian interrupted. It's not talent. It's not credentials. It's not even hard work. It's the willingness to believe they deserve the opportunity when it comes, instead of finding reasons why they don't. He met her eyes. You earned this, Evelyn. Not through normal channels, but you earned it. Now stop waiting for someone to tell you that you don't belong here and start proving that you do. He left before she could respond, and Evelyn stood alone in her new office, looking out at the city spread below, and wondered if she was brave enough to believe him. By the end of the day, Evelyn was officially employed by Meridian Global. HR had processed her paperwork with record speed. Her background check had come back clean, and she had a company laptop, email address, and badge that would get her through the front doors without having to explain herself to security. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt exhausted and uneasy, because Clara Vaughn's face, when Adrian had walked out of her office, had been perfectly composed. Too composed, like someone who'd just lost a battle but was already planning the war. And as Evelyn packed up her new laptop to take home for the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this job hadn't solved her problems. It had just made her a target for someone much more powerful, much more connected, and much more dangerous than she'd realized. The real fight hadn't even started yet. Evelyn's second day at Meridian Global started with an email that arrived at 6:47 a.m., before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee in her new office. The subject line read, "Mandatory compliance training, immediate action required." She opened it, her stomach already tightening with unease. The email was from Clara Vaughn's office, marked high priority, requesting that all new hires in strategic operations complete a comprehensive compliance training module before accessing any company systems or data. The training was scheduled for 9 a.m. in conference room 2304. Attendance was mandatory. Failure to complete the training would result in immediate suspension of system access pending review. It was signed by Clara herself. Evelyn stared at the screen, trying to decide if this was standard procedure or something more targeted. The email made it sound routine, bureaucratic, the kind of corporate requirement that everyone rolled their eyes at, but completed anyway. But the timing felt deliberate. Her second day, before she'd even had a chance to do any actual work, before Adrian's promised audit could begin. She forwarded the email to Adrian with a simple question. "Is this normal?" His response came back 3 minutes later. "No, but go anyway. Document everything." At 8:55 a.m., Evelyn walked into conference room 2304 and found herself completely alone. No other new hires, no training facilitator, just empty chairs arranged in neat rows facing a screen that displayed the Meridian Global logo and the words "Compliance and Professional Conduct, a Foundation for Excellence." At exactly 9 a.m., the door opened. But instead of a trainer, Clara Vaughn walked in, accompanied by a man Evelyn didn't recognize. Late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of face that had spent decades in legal battles and won most of them. "Ms. Parker," Clara said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for being punctual. This is Richard Moss from our legal department. He'll be conducting your orientation today." Evelyn's unease crystallized into something sharper. "I thought this was compliance training." "It is," Richard said, setting a thick folder on the table. "Specifically, compliance training regarding confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure obligations, and the legal ramifications of unauthorized access to proprietary information." He opened the folder, revealing documents marked with so many legal stamps and watermarks they looked like abstract art. "Given the unusual circumstances of your hiring, we want to ensure you fully understand the responsibilities and liabilities associated with your position." Translation: "We're building a legal case against you, and we're making sure you know it." Evelyn sat down slowly, her mind racing. This wasn't training. This was intimidation disguised as procedure. They were trying to scare her, make her understand how precarious her position was, how easily everything could be taken away if she stepped out of line. "I'm happy to review whatever materials you think are necessary," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. But I should mention that I've already signed standard NDAs as part of my onboarding paperwork. Standard NDAs cover standard situations, Richard replied. Your situation is far from standard. You had access to confidential strategic materials before you were an employee, before any protective agreements were in place. That creates potential liability exposure that we need to address comprehensively. Clara sat down across from Evelyn, her posture relaxed but her gaze sharp. We're not trying to make this difficult, Evelyn. We're simply ensuring that everyone understands the rules. Meridian Global has proprietary information worth billions of dollars. When that information is accessed by someone who hasn't gone through proper vetting channels, we have to take protective measures. I'm sure you understand. What I understand, Evelyn said quietly, is that Mr. Cole approved my hiring knowing exactly what happened that night. If there were legal concerns about my access to confidential materials, they should have been raised then, not now. Mr. Cole is brilliant, Clara said, her tone almost gentle. But he's not a lawyer. Sometimes his enthusiasm for talent leads him to overlook important procedural safeguards. That's why operations exists, to protect the company's interests, even when leadership's immediate priorities might conflict with long-term risk management. It was smoothly done, Evelyn had to admit. Clara was positioning herself as the responsible adult protecting the company from Adrian's impulsive decisions, making Evelyn the unfortunate collateral damage of necessary caution, rather than the target of deliberate sabotage. Richard slid the first document across the table. This is an enhanced confidentiality agreement specific to your role. It outlines in detail what constitutes proprietary information, the criminal and civil penalties for disclosure, and the company's rights to pursue legal action in cases of breach. He placed a pen next to it. Please read it carefully and sign on the last page. Evelyn picked up the document, scanning the dense legal language. Most of it was standard boilerplate about protecting company secrets and not sharing information with competitors. But buried in Section 7, subsection C, was a clause that made her blood run cold. Employee acknowledges that any information accessed prior to formal employment, regardless of circumstances, remains subject to all confidentiality provisions retroactively. Violation of this agreement may result in immediate termination and legal prosecution, including but not limited to claims for damages, injunctive relief, and criminal charges under applicable trade secret statutes. They were trying to turn her midnight conversation with Adrian into a legal weapon they could hold over her head indefinitely. I need to have a lawyer review this, Evelyn said, setting the document down. Clara's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. That's certainly your right, though I should mention that system access is contingent on completing this training, which includes signing the necessary agreements. Without system access, you can't perform your job functions. And company policy states that employees who are unable to fulfill their job functions for more than 3 consecutive days are subject to termination for cause. The threat was elegantly constructed. Sign this or lose the job, but framed as simple policy rather than coercion. How long do I have to get legal review? Evelyn asked. We'd prefer to complete this today, Richard said. But if you need external counsel, we can give you until end of business tomorrow. After that, we'll need to reassess your employment status. 24 hours to find a lawyer. She couldn't afford to review a document designed to trap her. Evelyn stood up. Then I'll take the 24 hours. Is there anything else? Clara exchanged a glance with Richard, something passing between them that Evelyn couldn't quite read. Actually, yes, Clara said. There's been a complaint filed regarding your conduct during the interview incident. What kind of complaint? From building security. Regarding unauthorized presence in a restricted area, misrepresentation of identity, and potential theft of proprietary materials. Clara pulled another document from Richard's folder. Now, we don't believe any of these allegations have merit, of course. Mr. Cole has made it clear that he doesn't consider your presence that night to be a security breach. But the complaint has been filed, and protocol requires that we investigate. Who filed it? Evelyn demanded, though she suspected she already knew. The complaint was filed anonymously, Richard said smoothly, as is permitted under company whistleblower policies. We're required to investigate all good faith complaints, regardless of source. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Clara couldn't directly attack Evelyn without going through Adrian, so she'd created a system of indirect pressure, legal agreements that turned every past action into potential liability, anonymous complaints that required investigation, procedural obstacles that made it impossible to actually do the job she'd been hired for, death by 1,000 administrative cuts. "I'll cooperate with any investigation," Evelyn said, her voice harder than she intended. "But I want it noted that this feels less like standard procedure and more like targeted harassment designed to force me out before I've even had a chance to start working." Clara's expression remained pleasant, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, that Evelyn was pushing back instead of crumbling. "I'm sorry you feel that way. We're simply following established protocols. If you have concerns about how those protocols are being applied, you're welcome to file a complaint with HR." The same HR that had tried to erase her from the system 2 days ago. Evelyn gathered her things. "I'll review the agreement and provide an answer by tomorrow. Until then, I assume my system access remains active." "For now," Richard said, "though we'd advise against accessing any sensitive materials until the confidentiality agreements are finalized." Which meant she couldn't do any meaningful work, couldn't contribute to the audit Adrian had promised, couldn't prove that hiring her had been anything other than a mistake. Evelyn walked out of the conference room feeling like she'd just survived a mugging disguised as a business meeting. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from nervousness, it was from anger. She went straight to Adrian's office. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who'd been managing Adrian's calendar for 7 years and ran his professional life with terrifying efficiency, looked up as Evelyn approached. "He's in a board meeting until 11, Patricia said before Evelyn could speak. "But he left instructions that if you needed to see him, I should interrupt." "Do you need me to interrupt?" Evelyn hesitated. Pulling Adrian out of a board meeting to complain about legal agreements and compliance training felt like exactly the kind of overreaction Clara was probably hoping for, proof that Evelyn couldn't handle corporate pressure without running to the CEO for protection. "No," Evelyn said, "but could you ask him to call me when he's free? It's important." Patricia made a note. "He has 15 minutes at 11:30 before his next meeting. I'll have him call you then." Evelyn went back to her office and tried to focus on something, anything, that didn't involve the legal trap being constructed around her. She pulled up industry reports, market analyses, background research on Meridian's operations, information that was publicly available and couldn't possibly violate any confidentiality agreement. But her mind kept circling back to the document sitting unsigned on Clara's desk, to the anonymous complaint that would require investigation, to the system of obstacles that had materialized overnight, like landmines in a field she couldn't see. At 11:32, her phone rang. "Tell me," Adrian said without preamble. Evelyn explained the meeting, the enhanced confidentiality agreement, the anonymous complaint. She tried to keep her voice professional, factual, but she could hear the strain creeping in. When she finished, Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "Send me a photo of the agreement. Don't sign anything until I've reviewed it with our outside counsel." Clara said I have until tomorrow. I don't care what Clara said. She's playing games and she's using company resources to do it. The anonymous complaint is fabricated. Security already cleared you. There's nothing to investigate. The enhanced NDA is punitive theater designed to make you uncomfortable enough to quit. His voice was tight with controlled anger. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated that she'd push back this hard." "It's not your fault," Evelyn said. "She's right that I'm not qualified for this job by normal standards. Maybe she's just doing what she thinks is best for the company. Stop defending her." Adrian's voice cut through her excuses. "Clara is brilliant at her job, but part of that brilliance is eliminating threats to her control before they can gain traction. You're a threat because you represent change, transparency, accountability, everything her current system is designed to avoid. She's not protecting the company, she's protecting herself." "So what do I do?" "You do your job," Adrian said firmly. "You ignore the intimidation tactics, you document everything, and you trust that I didn't hire you to watch you get destroyed by internal politics." He paused. "I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, I'm sending you something. Check your personal email in 5 minutes." He hung up before Evelyn could ask what he was sending. 4 minutes later, her personal email pinged with a message from an address she didn't recognize. The sender was identified only as AC. The subject line read, "For when you need to remember why this matters." Evelyn opened it. There was no message, just an attachment, a video file 3 minutes and 42 seconds long. She clicked play. The video was clearly recorded on a phone, the image slightly shaky but clear enough. It showed Adrian's office, but from a different angle than Evelyn had seen. Not the CEO's desk, but a small sitting area near the window. The date stamp in the corner read 3 weeks ago. Adrian was sitting on the couch, his tie loosened, looking exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Across from him sat a little girl, 7 years old, with dark hair and pigtails and her father's storm cloud eyes. Emma. "Daddy?" Emma was saying, her voice high and clear. "Mrs. Peterson said we should bring someone from our family to talk about their job for career day. Can you come?" Adrian smiled, but there was something painful in it. "When is it, sweetheart?" "Next Thursday, at 2 o'clock. "I have a meeting with investors at 2, Adrian said gently. "But maybe Mommy could—" "Mommy already came last year," Emma interrupted. "She talked about being a doctor and helping people. I wanted you to come this time and talk about what you do." "I help companies work better," Adrian said, using the same explanation Evelyn had heard him reference before. "I solve problems and make things more efficient." Emma looked at him with the devastating directness only children could manage. "But do you help people? Like Mommy helps people?" Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched for several seconds. "It's more complicated than that, Em. I help companies, and companies help people, so, indirectly, no," Emma said simply. "You don't help people. You help companies make money." "But Emma, that's not fair. I don't want you to come to career day," Emma said quietly, looking down at her hands. "Because I don't know what to tell my friends when they ask what you do that makes people's lives better. And I don't want to lie." The video ended. Evelyn sat staring at the blank screen, her throat tight. Adrian had sent her this for a reason, to remind her what was really at stake in the fight Clara was waging. It wasn't about procedures or protocols or protecting corporate interests. It was about whether Meridian Global was the kind of company that actually made things better or just made money while pretending to care. And Evelyn had become the focal point of that fight, whether she wanted to be or not. She spent the rest of the day doing what Adrian had told her to do, her job. She couldn't access sensitive operational data without triggering Clara's legal trap, but she could analyze publicly available information. She pulled quarterly reports, press releases, client testimonials, industry analyses, building a picture of Meridian Global from the outside looking in. What she found was interesting. On paper, Meridian looked exceptional. Client satisfaction scores were high. Employee retention rates were above industry average. Profit margins were healthy. Every metric that investors cared about trended in the right direction. But when Evelyn started comparing the public data to the fragments she remembered from that night in Adrian's conference room, the real operational dashboard, the complaint suppression patterns, discrepancies emerged. Client satisfaction scores were high, but client retention rates had been declining for 3 consecutive quarters. Companies hired Meridian for projects, rated the experience positively, then didn't come back. That suggested good initial performance followed by problems that emerged later after the satisfaction surveys were completed. Employee retention was above industry average, but voluntary departure rates were rising while involuntary terminations were falling. People were choosing to leave rather than being fired, which often indicated cultural problems rather than performance issues. Profit margins were healthy, but revenue growth was slowing while operating costs remained flat. That suggested Meridian was maintaining profits by becoming more efficient rather than by actually growing the business. Exactly the kind of optimization that could mask deeper problems. None of it was damning on its own. But together, the patterns painted a picture of a company that looked healthy from the outside while slowly dying from the inside. Evelyn was deep in a spreadsheet comparing project completion rates across different divisions when someone knocked on her office door. She looked up to find a woman in her early 30s standing in the doorway, Asian, professional, with tired eyes that suggested too many late nights and not enough sleep. Her badge identified her as Amy Chen, Senior Analyst, Operations Division. "Sorry to interrupt," Amy said. "I'm Amy. I work for Clara. I heard you started this week and wanted to introduce myself." Evelyn gestured to the empty chair across from her desk. "Please, come in." Amy sat down, but she looked uncomfortable, like she was there on an errand she didn't particularly want to be running. I also wanted to give you a heads up, unofficially. About? Clara's asked me to compile a report on all the projects you'll be involved with. Background materials, relevant data, team structures. She said it's to help you get up to speed faster. Amy paused. But between you and me, it feels less like helpful onboarding and more like building a paper trail. A paper trail for what? For proving that you had access to information you shouldn't have had, or that you made recommendations without proper context, or that you created problems instead of solving them. Amy's voice was quiet but firm. Look, I don't know you, but I know Clara, and I know that when she starts building documentation around someone this thoroughly, it usually ends with that person being managed out. Evelyn felt cold. Why are you telling me this? Amy was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Because 3 years ago, I was you. Not exactly. I came in through normal channels, did everything by the book. But I asked questions Clara didn't like, pointed out problems she wanted buried, suggested that maybe hitting our efficiency targets wasn't worth the cost if it meant people were burning out. She smiled bitterly. Within 2 months, I had performance improvement plans, documentation of cultural fit concerns, and a choice between resigning quietly or being terminated for cause. But you're still here. Because I stopped asking questions, Amy said flatly. I learned to keep my head down, do my work, and pretend I don't see the problems everyone pretends don't exist. It's not the career I wanted, but it's the career that survives in Clara's operations division. She stood up. I'm telling you this because you seem like someone who cares about actually fixing things. And I want you to know what you're up against before you invest too much hope in the idea that caring matters more than compliance. After Amy left, Evelyn sat in her office as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning the city below into gold and shadow. She thought about Amy's warning, about Clara's systematic destruction of anyone who challenged her control, about the careful architecture of fear that kept people silent even when they saw problems clearly. She thought about Emma's question, do you help people? And she thought about the choice in front of her, shut up, survive, and become another Amy Chen, burned out and resigned to a career of looking away, or keep pushing, keep questioning, keep fighting, and probably lose everything in the process. It shouldn't have been a hard choice. Survival was logical, strategic, the smart play. But Evelyn had spent 3 years being invisible, being smart, playing it safe. And where had it gotten her? Cleaning floors while her degree gathered dust and her potential withered from lack of use. Maybe it was time to stop being smart and start being brave. At 5:47 p.m., Clara was preparing to leave for the day when her office door opened without warning. She looked up, irritation flashing across her face, then smoothed into professional neutrality when she saw who it was. Evelyn walked in and placed the unsigned confidentiality agreement on Clara's desk. I'm not signing this, Evelyn said. Clara raised an eyebrow. Then I'm afraid your system access will be suspended pending. I've already spoken to Adrian. He's having outside counsel review the agreement for enforceability. They're concerned that retroactive confidentiality clauses applied to pre-employment conversations may violate state labor law, particularly when those clauses are used to create termination pretexts. Evelyn kept her voice steady, professional. I'm happy to sign a standard confidentiality agreement identical to what every other employee at my level signs. But I won't sign a document designed specifically to create legal liability for having a conversation I was invited to participate in. Claire's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her eyes. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Evelyn agreed, but it's my mistake to make. Just like it's my choice to do the job Adrian hired me for, instead of spending my time navigating administrative obstacles designed to make me quit. You don't understand how things work here, Clara said, her voice still pleasant, but with an edge underneath. Meridian operates on trust, on proven track records, on people who've demonstrated they can handle responsibility without creating chaos. You've been here 3 days. You haven't earned the benefit of the doubt you're demanding. You're right, Evelyn said. I haven't earned anything. But neither have I done anything to warrant the level of scrutiny and obstruction I've faced since the moment I walked through those doors. You want me to fail, not because of anything I've done, but because of what I represent to your control over operations. And I'm not going to make it easy for you. She turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped her. Adrian won't protect you forever, Clara said quietly. He's brilliant, but he's also easily distracted by shiny new things. Give it a few weeks, a month at most, and something else will catch his attention. When that happens, when you're not his current project anymore, you'll still be here. And I'll still be here. And all the rules you think you can ignore because you have his backing, they'll still apply. Evelyn looked back at Clara, this woman who'd built an empire of efficiency on a foundation of fear and control, and felt something crystallize inside her. Not anger exactly, but clarity. "You know what the difference between you and Adrian is?" Evelyn asked. "You both built systems, but he's willing to tear his down when he realizes it's broken. You're just trying to hold yours together long enough to retire with your legacy intact, regardless of who gets crushed in the machinery while you're maintaining it." She left Clara's office without waiting for a response. That night, Evelyn worked late in her office, pulling together everything she'd found: the discrepancies between public data and private reality, the patterns that suggested systemic problems, the evidence that Meridian Global's impressive metrics were masking serious cultural rot. At 9:15 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Third floor break room. Now, come alone." Evelyn stared at the message. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, a setup, something designed to create another incident that could be used against her. But curiosity won out over caution. The third floor was mostly deserted at this hour, occupied by junior staff who'd gone home hours ago. The break room was at the end of a hallway, dimly lit, with vending machines that hummed quietly in the silence. Evelyn pushed open the door and found Amy Chen waiting for her, along with two other people she didn't recognize. A man in his 40s with a Meridian badge identifying him as David Torres, senior project manager, and a younger woman, maybe 25, whose badge read Jessica Park, data analyst. "Sorry for the cloak and dagger routine," Amy said, "but there are 3 things you should know. First, Clara has security monitoring your office. Anything you say or do in there is being recorded." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "That's illegal without consent. It's a gray area if she claims it's for security purposes related to the ongoing investigation," David said. "She's covering it under the anonymous complaint protocols." "Second," Jessica added, "the complaint wasn't anonymous. Clara filed it herself using the whistleblower system. We have proof. Email timestamps that show her drafting it before the security log she's claiming triggered the concern. And third," Amy finished, "we want to help you. Not just you. We want to help fix what's broken here. But we need you to understand what you're really up against." Evelyn looked at the 3 of them, these people who'd sought her out in secret, who were risking their own positions to warn her, and felt the weight of what she'd stumbled into settling fully on her shoulders. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have gone to Adrian directly, filed your own complaints, pushed for change without waiting for someone like me to show up." "Because we tried," David said quietly. 2 years ago, I raised concerns about project timelines being manipulated to hide delays. I was reassigned to a different division within a week. Jessica flagged data inconsistencies in our reporting last year. She spent 6 months in performance review hell before they decided she could stay if she kept quiet. "And I already told you my story," Amy said. "We've all tried in our own ways to fix things. And we've all learned that challenging Clara directly is career suicide. But you have something we didn't have. You have Adrian's attention, his protection, his commitment to actually investigating instead of just managing the problem away." "So you want me to what?" "Exactly," Evelyn asked. "Be your shield while you feed me information?" "We want you to be what we couldn't be," Jessica said. "Someone who sees this whole picture and has the position to do something about it. We can give you documentation, evidence, testimony about how things really work here. But we can't be the face of it, not without losing everything we've worked for." It was a lot to process. Evelyn looked at these 3 people who'd been beaten down by the same system she'd just barely started to understand, and she saw her own future written in their tired eyes and careful words. This was what happened to people who fought and lost. They became informants in break rooms, passing information in secret because they'd learned that speaking up openly only led to destruction. "I need to think about this," Evelyn said. "Don't think too long," Amy warned. "Claire's building her case fast. By the end of this week, she'll have enough documentation to push for your termination with or without Adrian's approval. You've got a narrow window to move first." Evelyn went home that night with her head spinning, Clara's warning echoing in her mind. Adrian won't protect you forever. And the terrible truth was, Clara was right. Whatever protection Evelyn had was temporary, contingent, dependent on Adrian's continued interest and attention. The moment he moved on to the next crisis, the next priority, the next shiny problem that needed solving, Evelyn would be alone in a building full of people who resented her presence and wanted her gone. She couldn't win this fight with Adrian's protection. She could only win it by proving she didn't need protection at all. Which meant the audit couldn't just expose Clara's problems. It had to expose them so thoroughly, so publicly, so undeniably, that no amount of documentation or procedure or administrative maneuvering could make the truth disappear. Evelyn pulled out her laptop and started writing. Not a report, not a memo, but a complete detailed analysis of everything she'd found, every discrepancy, every pattern, every piece of evidence that Meridian Global's impressive performance was built on a foundation of buried complaints and manipulated data. She worked through the night, fueled by coffee and anger and the stubborn determination that had gotten her a scholarship to state in the first place. By dawn, she had 47 pages of documentation, cross-referenced with publicly available data, internal metrics she'd memorized from Adrian's dashboard, and testimony from sources she carefully anonymized. It was thorough. It was damning. And it was exactly the kind of thing Clara would use to prove that Evelyn had violated confidentiality agreements, accessed unauthorized information, and created documentation designed to harm the company, which meant Evelyn couldn't show it to anyone yet. Not until she had protection that was stronger than Adrian's word, more permanent than his current interest. She needed insurance, and she had an idea where to find it. At 7:23 a.m. on Thursday morning, Evelyn walked into Meridian Global carrying a folder that could either save her career or end it spectacularly. She'd barely slept in 3 days, surviving on coffee and the kind of focused determination that came from knowing you were standing at the edge of something irreversible. She went straight to Adrian's office, bypassing Patricia's attempts to manage the schedule. "He's on a call with Tokyo," Patricia said, but Evelyn was already opening the door. Adrian looked up sharply, phone pressed to his ear, clearly about to object to the interruption, but something in Evelyn's expression made him pause. He spoke briefly into the phone. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes, and hung up. "This better be important," he said. Evelyn closed the door behind her and set the folder on his desk. "I need you to call an emergency board meeting, today if possible, tomorrow at the latest." Adrian stared at her. "You want me to call an emergency board meeting on 4 days' notice because I found it," Evelyn said. "All of it. The complaint suppression, the data manipulation, the systematic burial of problems across every division, and it's worse than we thought. Clara's not just protecting her department. She's running a coordinated operation across multiple divisions to make the entire company look more efficient than it actually is." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from annoyed to intensely focused. "Show me." Evelyn opened the folder and began laying out documents, printouts of her analysis, charts showing the discrepancies between reported metrics and actual performance, timeline comparisons that revealed the patterns of suppression. She talked him through it methodically, point by point, building the case like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Client satisfaction was high, but only because complaints filed after the initial project completion weren't counted in the metrics. Evelyn had cross-referenced project timelines with support ticket timestamps and found hundreds of issues that emerged 3 to 6 months after a project closed, long after the satisfaction surveys were completed, conveniently outside the measurement window. Employee retention looked strong, but voluntary departure rates told a different story. People weren't being fired. They were being managed into quitting through performance improvement plans, reassignments, and strategic isolation. Evelyn had found patterns in exit interview data that Clara's division had access to but never flagged. 73% of voluntary departures in the past 18 months cited workplace culture as a primary reason for leaving. Revenue growth was slowing not because of market conditions, but because Meridian was losing repeat business faster than it was acquiring new clients. First-time clients gave high ratings. Second-time clients were nearly non-existent. That suggested a fundamental problem with delivery quality that was being masked by focusing only on initial impressions. And the compliance reports, the documents that were supposed to track regulatory adherence, ethical standards, workplace safety. Those were the smoking gun. Evelyn had found evidence that Clara's team was editing reports before they reached Adrian's desk, removing complaints that didn't fit the narrative of smooth operations. The original version still existed in the system, buried in archived folders that most people didn't know to look for. But Evelyn had known to look, because she'd spent 3 years watching people throw away evidence without realizing that trash always left traces. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When Evelyn finished, he was silent for a long moment. "How much of this did you get from secured systems?" he asked quietly. "None of it," Evelyn said. "Everything I used is either publicly available, information I observed during my time cleaning here, or data that's accessible to anyone with basic employee credentials. I specifically didn't access anything that could be used to claim I violated security protocols." "But you memorized my operational dashboard that night in the conference room." "I observed it," Evelyn corrected. "You showed it to me. That's not unauthorized access. That's you choosing to share information with someone you were interviewing. If there are consequences for that decision, they should fall on you, not me." Adrian almost smiled. "You've been thinking about the legal exposure." "I've been thinking about how Clara would try to destroy this if I gave her ammunition, so I didn't give her any." Evelyn paused. "But that also means I can't prove some of the most damaging things without access to systems I'm currently locked out of. The enhanced NDA she wanted me to sign would have given her grounds to block my access permanently. That's why I refused." "And why you need the board meeting?" "I need the board to authorize a full audit before Clara can finish building her case against me," Evelyn said bluntly. "Right now, she's positioning me as a security risk who needs to be removed. But if the board orders an audit based on the evidence I've compiled, then I'm not a problem. I'm the person who identified serious operational failures that the board needs to investigate. That changes the narrative completely." Adrian picked up one of the charts, studying it closely. "Claire's been with Meridian for 23 years. She's respected, connected, politically savvy. Half the board thinks she's the best operations director in the industry. You're asking me to accuse her of systematic fraud based on analysis from someone who's been here less than a week." "I'm not asking you to accuse her of anything," Evelyn said. "I'm asking you to present evidence of discrepancies that require investigation. Let the audit determine what happened and who's responsible. If I'm wrong, the audit will prove it and Clara will be vindicated. If I'm right..." She didn't finish the sentence. Adrian set down the chart and looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. "You understand what you're doing, right? If this goes forward, if we bring this to the board, there's no taking it back. Either you're right and Clara's career is over, or you're wrong and yours is. There's no middle ground here." "I know. And you're sure you want to do this?" "Because I can protect you from administrative harassment, but I can't protect you from being publicly wrong. If this audit comes back and shows that your analysis is flawed, that the problems you're claiming don't actually exist, then I'll have no choice but to let you go. The board will demand it." Evelyn thought about Amy, David, and Jessica hiding in break rooms, passing information in whispers, because they'd learned that speaking up openly only led to punishment. She thought about 3 years of being invisible, of watching problems get buried, of knowing things were broken and having no power to fix them. She thought about Emma asking her father if he helped people, and Adrian not having an answer. "I'm sure," Evelyn said. Adrian nodded slowly, coming to some internal decision. "Okay, I'll call the board meeting, but Evelyn..." He waited until she met his eyes. "This is going to get ugly. Clara won't go down quietly, and she's got allies who'll defend her. You need to be prepared for that." "I am." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You're not. You can't be. Nobody's ever prepared for what it feels like to have powerful people trying to destroy your credibility in public. But I'll do what I can to make sure you get a fair hearing." He picked up his phone and started making calls. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Adrian had pulled strings, called in favors, and leveraged the urgency of significant operational concerns requiring immediate executive attention to get 7 board members to clear their schedules on 24 hours' notice. Word spread through Meridian faster than wildfire. By Thursday afternoon, everyone knew something major was happening. The executive assistants were whispering. The senior managers were having closed-door meetings. And Clara Vaughn's office had become a fortress of activity as she mobilized her own response to whatever threat was materializing. Evelyn spent Thursday documenting everything, backing up files, organizing evidence, preparing for the possibility that her system access could be revoked at any moment. She worked methodically, fighting down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her every time she thought too hard about what she'd set in motion. At 4:17 p.m., Clara herself appeared in Evelyn's doorway. "May I come in?" Clara asked, her tone perfectly pleasant. Evelyn gestured to the chair, her heart pounding. This was it. The confrontation she'd been both expecting and dreading. Clara closed the door and sat down with the kind of composed grace that came from decades of navigating corporate warfare. "I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow's meeting, off the record." "I'm not sure anything between us can be off the record at this point," Evelyn said. "Fair enough." Clara crossed her legs, utterly relaxed. "I'm going to be direct with you, Evelyn. I know what you think you've found. I know what you've told Adrian, and I want you to understand something before you walk into that boardroom tomorrow and make accusations that will define the rest of your very short career." "I'm listening." "You think I've been burying problems," Clara said, "manipulating data, suppressing complaints, running some kind of corrupt operation to make my department look better than it is. And on the surface, I can see how the evidence might support that interpretation. But what you don't understand, what you can understand because you've been here less than a week, is the context behind those decisions." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a patient, almost teaching tone. "Meridian operates in an incredibly competitive environment. Our clients expect perfection. Our investors demand consistent growth. Our employees need stability. My job, for 23 years, has been to deliver all of that while managing the messy reality that nothing ever goes perfectly. So yes, I prioritize certain complaints over others. Yes, I focus on metrics that matter to stakeholders rather than every minor issue that crops up. Yes, I make judgment calls about what needs immediate escalation and what can be handled internally. That's not corruption, that's management. Editing compliance reports before they reach the CEO isn't management, Evelyn said quietly. It's deception. Clara's expression didn't change. I review reports for accuracy and relevance. If a complaint is already resolved, or if it's based on a misunderstanding, or if it's going to cause unnecessary alarm without adding value to executive decision-making, then yes, I exercise editorial discretion. That's part of my role as Director of Operations, to ensure that the information reaching leadership is actionable rather than just noise. Who decides what's noise and what's a real problem? I do, Clara said simply. Based on 23 years of experience and a track record of keeping this company profitable, even when the market was actively trying to destroy us. I've earned that discretion through results. And what about the people who filed those complaints? Evelyn asked. The ones you decided were noise? Did they think their problems were minor? Did they feel heard when their concerns disappeared into your editorial process? Clara sighed like she was dealing with a particularly stubborn child who refused to understand basic concepts. Evelyn, I'm going to tell you something that nobody wants to admit out loud. Most employee complaints are not about real problems. They're about hurt feelings, bruised egos, political maneuvering, or simple misunderstandings. If I escalated every complaint to executive review, Adrian would spend all day mediating interpersonal drama instead of running a company. My job is to filter signal from noise, and I'm very good at my job. Unless the signal you're filtering out is telling you something you don't want to hear. Such as the fact that your efficiency metrics are built on people working unsustainable hours, that your complaint resolution numbers look good because you're resolving complaints by making the complainants quit, and that your entire operational model depends on burying problems deep enough that nobody with actual authority notices them until it's too late. Evelyn kept her voice steady. That's not noise, Clara. That's a systemic failure that you've been hiding for years. Clara's pleasant expression finally cracked, just slightly, revealing something harder underneath. You've been here 4 days. 4 days. And you think you understand how this company works better than someone who's dedicated 2 decades to keeping it running? You think your outsider perspective makes you more qualified to judge operational decisions than the people who've actually lived through the consequences? I think my outsider perspective means I can see things you've trained yourself not to notice, Evelyn said. And I think the fact that you're in my office right now trying to convince me to back down before tomorrow's meeting means you're more worried about what that audit will find than you're willing to admit. Clara stood up smoothly, her composure fully restored. I'm not worried about the audit. I'm worried about you. Because when this is over, when the board reviews the evidence and realizes that you've built a case on incomplete data and fundamental misunderstandings of how operations actually work, you're going to be the one who looks incompetent, not me. Then you should welcome the audit, Evelyn said. Let it prove I'm wrong. Oh, I do welcome it, Clara said, moving toward the door. But I want you to remember this conversation tomorrow, when you're sitting in front of the board, making accusations you can't fully support, watching your credibility evaporate in real time. I gave you a chance to reconsider. Remember that. She left, and Evelyn sat alone in her office, trying to stop her hands from shaking. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Clara's words, looking for the trap she knew had to be there. Clara was too confident, too calm. She wasn't acting like someone who was about to be exposed. She was acting like someone who had a plan. At 2:34 a.m., Evelyn's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Check your email, personal account, now. Evelyn grabbed her laptop and opened her personal email. There was a message from Amy's personal address, sent from what looked like a library computer based on the IP address visible in the headers. The message had no text, just an attachment. A PDF of an internal memo dated 2 weeks ago. Evelyn opened it and felt her blood turn to ice. The memo was from Clara to the board's audit committee, expressing concerns about Adrian's judgment regarding personnel decisions. It outlined the circumstances of Evelyn's hiring, framed it as a potential security breach, and recommended a comprehensive review of recent executive decisions to ensure proper protocols were being followed. The memo was dated 5 days before Evelyn had even been offered the job. Clara hadn't been reacting to Evelyn's hiring. She'd been anticipating it. She'd planted seeds with the board before Evelyn even existed as a problem, creating a narrative that anything Evelyn discovered would look like retaliation rather than legitimate concerns. Evelyn's phone rang. Amy. Did you see it? Amy asked without preamble. I saw it. She's been building this case for weeks, Evelyn. Everything she's done, the enhanced NDA, the anonymous complaint, the delays in your onboarding, it's all been setting up a narrative that you're unstable, vindictive, and willing to make false accusations to protect yourself from legitimate scrutiny. Amy's voice was tight with urgency. When you walk into that board meeting tomorrow, they're not going to see you as a whistleblower. They're going to see you as exactly what Clara's been telling them you are. A security risk who's trying to deflect from your own violations by attacking the person investigating you. How do I fight that? I don't know, Amy admitted. Clara's really good at this. By the time she's done, even the evidence you've compiled will look suspect, like you accessed unauthorized systems, violated confidentiality, manufactured problems to justify your employment. She's going to flip the entire narrative, and the board is already primed to believe her version over yours. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. So I'm screwed. Unless you have something she doesn't know about, Amy said. Something she can't have anticipated or prepared for. Do you? Evelyn thought about the 47 pages of analysis she'd compiled, the charts and data, and carefully cross-referenced evidence. All of it legitimate, all of it defensible, but all of it potentially reframable as the desperate actions of someone trying to avoid accountability. Unless she had something else, something that couldn't be dismissed or reframed, something that proved the problems were real, regardless of Evelyn's motives for exposing them. Maybe, Evelyn said slowly, but I need your help, and David's, and Jessica's, and anyone else who's been documenting problems that Claire's been burying. What do you need? Testimony. Real testimony on the record, from people who've experienced the suppression firsthand. Not anonymous complaints or secondhand observations. Actual employees willing to stand up in front of the board and say what's been happening. Amy was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn, that's asking people to commit career suicide. Clara will destroy anyone who testifies against her. You know that. I know, but I also know that if nobody's willing to speak up, then Clara wins. She keeps running operations the same way, keeps burying problems, keeps grinding people down until they quit or learn to stay silent, and nothing changes. Let me make some calls, Amy said finally. I can't promise anything, but I'll see who's willing to risk it. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at Meridian at 8 a.m. to find a message from Patricia. Adrian wanted to see her before the board meeting. She found him in his office, looking like he'd slept about as much as she had, which was to say, not at all. "I got a call from 3 board members this morning," Adrian said without preamble. "All of them asking pointed questions about your background, your qualifications, and whether I was aware of potential security concerns related to your hiring." He looked at her steadily. "Claire's been working the phones. She's got them primed to distrust anything you say before you even walk into that room." "I know," Evelyn said. "Amy sent me the memo Clara planted 2 weeks ago." Adrian's expression darkened. "She's been planning this since the beginning. I should have seen it coming." "You couldn't have known she'd move this fast or this comprehensively." Evelyn sat down across from him. "But Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. If this goes badly today, if the board sides with Clara, if they decide I'm the problem, are you going to be able to let me go?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "If the evidence shows you're wrong, then yes. I'll have no choice. The board won't give me one." "Good," Evelyn said, and meant it. "Because if you can't, then this whole thing becomes about you protecting me instead of about fixing what's actually broken. And that's exactly the narrative Clara wants. You're awfully calm for someone whose entire career is about to be decided in a boardroom." "I'm terrified," Evelyn admitted. "But I'm also done letting fear dictate my choices. I spent 3 years being afraid to speak up, afraid to take risks, afraid to believe I deserved better than being invisible. And where did it get me? If I'm going to lose everything anyway, I'd rather lose it fighting than staying silent." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's go fight." The boardroom was on the 40th floor, a space designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows, massive table, and portraits of past CEOs whose stern faces seemed to judge everyone who entered. 7 board members sat in high-backed leather chairs, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to outright hostile. Clara sat at one end of the table, perfectly composed, flanked by Richard Moss from legal and 2 other senior operations managers Evelyn didn't recognize. She looked completely at ease, like someone who knew exactly how this meeting would unfold. Adrian took his seat at the head of the table. Evelyn sat beside him, acutely aware that she was the only person in the room without 2 decades of corporate experience and a net worth measured in millions. Harold Chen, the board chairman, late 60s, former Fortune 500 CEO, known for his no-nonsense approach to governance, opened the meeting. "Adrian, you called this emergency session citing significant operational concerns. I think we'd all like to understand what's serious enough to justify pulling 7 busy people together on 24 hours' notice." Adrian gestured to Evelyn. "Ms. Parker has identified patterns in our operational data that suggest systematic issues with how we're reporting performance metrics and handling internal complaints. I believe these concerns warrant a comprehensive audit." Harold turned his attention to Evelyn, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Ms. Parker, I understand you've been with Meridian for less than a week?" 4 days, Evelyn confirmed. 4 days, Harold repeated. "And in that time you've uncovered operational failures that our director of operations, with 23 years of experience, has somehow missed?" "I've identified discrepancies that require investigation," Evelyn said carefully. "Whether they represent failures or something else is what the audit should determine." Another board member, Margaret Santos, early 50s, venture capitalist with a reputation for brutal efficiency, leaned forward. "Before we dive into specifics, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Clara, you've raised concerns about the circumstances of Ms. Parker's hiring. Can you elaborate?" Clara's expression was appropriately concerned, not hostile. "I have no personal issue with Ms. Parker, but I do have concerns about the process. She had unauthorized access to confidential strategic materials before any employment relationship existed. When I tried to implement standard security protocols to address this, those protocols were overridden. I worry that we're allowing personal relationships to override necessary safeguards." "Personal relationships?" Adrian's voice was sharp. "I offered Evelyn a job because she demonstrated analytical skills that none of the formally credentialed candidates could match. There's nothing personal about recognizing talent." "Perhaps," Clara said smoothly. "But talent without proper vetting creates liability. And when that talent immediately begins making serious accusations against established operations, We have to ask ourselves whether we're seeing legitimate concerns or someone trying to justify their position by creating problems that only they can solve. It was beautifully done. Clara had just reframed the entire audit as Evelyn's attempt to manufacture job security rather than as legitimate investigation of real problems. Evelyn felt the room shift. The board members were looking at her differently now, seeing not a whistleblower but a potential troublemaker. "May I present my findings?" Evelyn asked, keeping her voice steady. Harold nodded. "Please." Evelyn opened her folder and began walking through the evidence, the client retention data, the employee departure patterns, the discrepancies in compliance reporting. She kept it factual, clinical, avoiding accusations and focusing on observable patterns that required explanation. But as she talked, she could see Clara's team making notes, exchanging glances, preparing their counterarguments. And when Evelyn finished, Margaret was the first to speak. "These are interesting observations," Margaret said, "but I'm not seeing smoking guns. Client retention fluctuates for lots of reasons. Employee departures could reflect market conditions. Compliance reports get edited all the time for clarity and relevance." She looked at Clara. "Do you want to respond to these concerns?" Clara stood, her presentation materials already prepared, because of course they were. She'd known exactly what Evelyn would present. "I'm glad Ms. Parker has taken an interest in our operations," Clara began, "but I think her analysis reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex organizations actually function. Let me address each concern in turn." What followed was a masterclass in defensive deflection. Clara had explanations for everything, reasonable, plausible explanations that made Evelyn's analysis look naive rather than insightful. Client retention was down because Meridian was deliberately focusing on higher-value projects rather than repeat commodity work. Employee departures were up because the market was hot, and people were being poached with offers Meridian couldn't match. Compliance reports were edited to remove resolved issues that would otherwise clutter executive decision-making with irrelevant historical data. Every point Evelyn had raised, Clara dismantled with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades mastering corporate rhetoric. And the board was buying it. Evelyn could see it in their expressions, in the way they were nodding along with Clara's explanations, in the increasing skepticism with which they looked at Evelyn's evidence. This was going exactly as Clara had planned. Then the boardroom door opened. Amy walked in, followed by David, Jessica, and 6 other people Evelyn didn't recognize, all wearing Meridian badges, all looking terrified but determined. Harold looked annoyed at the interruption. "This is a closed board meeting. Who authorized?" "We did," Amy said, her voice steadier than Evelyn expected. "Under company whistleblower protocols, employees have the right to present concerns directly to the board when they believe operational leadership is not addressing serious issues. We're invoking that right." Clara's composure finally cracked, just for a second, as she realized what was happening. The witnesses she hadn't anticipated were standing in the boardroom, ready to testify to everything she'd spent weeks positioning the board to dismiss, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. 9 people stood in the doorway, 9 employees who'd spent years learning to stay quiet, now prepared to speak the truths that could cost them everything. Harold Chen recovered first, his expression shifting from annoyance to careful neutrality. "This is highly irregular." "So is systematically burying employee complaints for 3 years, Amy said, stepping forward. "But we're here now, and we're invoking our rights under the whistleblower policy you approved last year. We have testimony relevant to this audit discussion, and company policy says you have to hear it." Margaret Santos looked at Clara, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Did you know about this?" "I had no idea," Clara said, and that much was probably true. "Though I'm curious what complaints these employees think weren't properly addressed. We have extensive documentation of our complaint resolution process." "You have documentation of complaints you chose to acknowledge," David Torres interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd held silence too long. "The ones you buried don't make it into your official records. That's the point." Harold gestured to the empty chairs along the wall. "Sit. But I want this understood. We're not here to litigate individual grievances. If you have information relevant to systemic operational issues, present it. If this is about personal disputes or performance reviews, take it through proper HR channels." The 9 employees sat, and Evelyn felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. This was no longer a boardroom presentation that Clara could control with prepared responses. This was testimony, human and raw, and impossible to dismiss with corporate rhetoric. Amy went first, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 years ago, I was a senior analyst in operations. I identified a pattern where project managers were consistently underreporting hours worked by junior staff to make efficiency metrics look better than they were. When I raised this with Clara, I was told it was a misunderstanding of how we categorized billable versus non-billable time. She pulled out a folder of her own, but I kept copies of the original reports and the edited versions that went to executive leadership. The pattern wasn't a misunderstanding. It was systematic falsification of labor data to inflate productivity numbers. She slid the documents across the table to Harold, who began examining them with increasing focus. David spoke next. 2 years ago, a junior consultant on my team reported being harassed by a client. When she filed a formal complaint, I was instructed by Clara's office to resolve it internally without escalating to HR. The resolution was that we removed the consultant from the project and told the client we'd assigned someone more experienced. The consultant quit 3 weeks later. The client continued working with Meridian for another year, generating over $2 million in revenue. That complaint never made it into any official record. How many similar incidents? Margaret asked quietly. In my division alone, 11 in the past 2 years. All handled the same way. Remove the complaining employee, preserve the client relationship, bury the documentation. Jessica Park was next, her voice quieter but no less firm. I'm a data analyst. My job is to maintain the metrics dashboards that track operational performance. 6 months ago, I noticed discrepancies between the raw data I was pulling from project management systems and the aggregated reports that were being sent to executive leadership. When I asked my supervisor about it, I was told that Clara's team handled final data compilation and I should focus on my assigned responsibilities. She pulled out a flash drive. I kept copies of both versions, the raw data and the reported data. The differences are significant. Complaint resolution times that were actually averaging 47 days were being reported as 23 days. Client satisfaction scores that included all feedback were at 78%, but the reported scores excluding outlier responses were 92% plus. Project completion rates. How did you get access to this data? Clara interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. Those compilation systems are restricted for security reasons. I had access as part of my job, Jessica said, until 3 weeks ago, when my credentials were suddenly revoked. No explanation, no documentation, just access denied. When I asked why, I was told it was routine security protocol updates, but my access was never restored. Harold looked at Clara. Why was her access revoked? I'd have to check the specific circumstances, Clara said, but her composure was cracking at the edges. We make security adjustments all the time based on role requirements. My role requirements didn't change, Jessica said. But I'd started asking questions about the data discrepancies. A week later, I couldn't access the systems anymore. That's not security protocol. That's silencing someone who saw too much. One by one, the other employees testified. Stories of complaints filed and disappeared, of data requested and denied, of concerns raised and dismissed, of people who'd questioned the official narratives and found themselves reassigned, isolated, or managed into resignation. Each story on its own might have been explainable: misunderstandings, normal corporate friction, the inevitable conflicts of large organizations. But together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Clara tried. She objected to hearsay, questioned the employees' motives, pointed out that disgruntled workers often misrepresented legitimate management decisions. She noted that every single person testifying had some complaint about their treatment, some reason to harbor resentment, some motivation to distort the truth. But the documentation they'd brought, the emails, the original reports, the comparison data, that was harder to explain away. Margaret was the one who finally cut through Clara's defenses. I'm looking at these edited compliance reports, Clara, the ones where complaints were removed before they reached Adrian's desk. Can you explain the decision-making process that determined which complaints were relevant and which weren't? As I explained earlier, we filter for actionable information. These aren't minor issues being filtered, Margaret interrupted, holding up one of the reports. This is a complaint about safety violations on a construction project that resulted in 2 worker injuries. The original report flagged it as requiring immediate executive attention and potential regulatory disclosure. The version that reached Adrian's desk mentioned the project completion, but nothing about the injuries or the safety concerns. That's not filtering for relevance. That's actively concealing material information. Clara's jaw tightened. The safety issues were being addressed through proper channels. Including them in the executive summary would have created unnecessary alarm about a situation that was already being handled. Who decided it was being handled properly? Adrian asked, his voice cold. Because those injuries should have come to me immediately. They didn't. And now I'm looking at potential regulatory violations because we didn't report them within the required time frame. We reported them to the appropriate regulatory bodies. 4 days late, Jessica interjected. I saw the timestamps. The incident happened on a Tuesday. The regulatory filing wasn't submitted until Saturday. The legal requirement is within 72 hours for workplace injuries requiring medical treatment. We missed the deadline because the approval to file got stuck in your office, waiting for you to decide if it would make the metrics look bad. The room went very quiet. Harold set down the documents he'd been reviewing and looked at Clara with an expression that had gone from neutral to genuinely concerned. Clara, I need you to be very clear with me right now. Are you telling this board that you have been making independent decisions about what information reaches the CEO and what gets buried, including matters with potential regulatory and legal implications? I've been exercising the judgment you hired me to exercise, Clara said, her voice tight. 23 years of keeping this company running smoothly, making thousands of decisions every day about what requires executive attention and what can be handled operationally. You can't have it both ways. You can't demand efficiency and then complain when someone actually manages the information flow to enable efficient decision-making. Efficient decision-making requires accurate information, Adrian said. What you're describing isn't management, it's censorship, and it's put the company at serious legal risk. Legal risk that we've successfully navigated without incident for years, Clara shot back, her composure finally breaking. You want to know the truth? The real truth? This company would collapse if you tried to handle every single complaint, every minor incident, every employee grievance that crosses my desk. I've spent 2 decades protecting Meridian from death by committee, from analysis paralysis, from the kind of bureaucratic chaos that kills companies. And my reward for that is to sit here and be accused of corruption by someone who's been here 4 days and a handful of disgruntled employees who can't handle being told no. I handled being told no just fine, Amy said quietly. What I couldn't handle was watching good people quit because they tried to report problems and got punished for it. What I couldn't handle was knowing that the metrics we were showing investors were lies, and that I was complicit in those lies because I was too afraid to speak up again. Clara turned on her. You were afraid because you knew that making those accusations without proof would be career suicide. You're only here now because you're hiding behind Ms. Parker and hoping the board will be too focused on me to notice that you're settling old scores. Then let's find out if it's old scores or real problems, Harold said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. I'm calling for a full independent audit, effective immediately. External auditors, unrestricted access to all systems and personnel, complete review of operational practices and data reporting for the past 3 years. He looked at Clara. And Clara, I'm sorry, but you're suspended pending the results of that audit. With pay, but effective now. We can't have you overseeing operations while we're investigating those same operations. Clara's face went white. You're suspending me based on unsubstantiated allegations from a woman who's been here 4 days and employees with documented performance issues? I'm suspending you based on evidence of material discrepancies between reported data and actual operational metrics, Harold said firmly. If the audit clears you, you'll be reinstated with our apologies. But until then, this company cannot afford the appearance of impropriety, and we certainly can't afford the reality of regulatory violations. He turned to Adrian. You'll oversee operations directly until we can bring in an interim director. Margaret, I want you to coordinate with our external auditors. I want them in here Monday morning, and I want weekly reports to the full board until this is resolved. Margaret nodded, already making notes. Harold looked at the 9 employees still sitting along the wall. Thank you for coming forward. I know that took courage. You'll each be interviewed as part of the audit process, and I want to be very clear, there will be no retaliation for your testimony today. If anyone experiences any negative consequences for speaking up, you report it directly to me. He glanced at Clara. That's not a suggestion. That's board policy. and anyone who violates it will face immediate termination. Clara stood, gathering her materials with hands that shook slightly despite her attempts to maintain composure. This is a mistake. You're going to tear apart an organization that's been functioning efficiently for years because you're allowing emotion to override business judgment. She looked directly at Evelyn. And you're going to discover that the problems you think you've found are going to evaporate under actual scrutiny. I hope you're prepared for what happens when this audit proves you wrong. She walked out of the boardroom with her head high, but Evelyn could see the cracks in her armor now, the fear underneath the confidence. After Clara left, Harold addressed the room. This meeting is adjourned. Adrian, I want a preliminary briefing on what you'll need to manage operations in Clara's absence. Everyone else, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch as the audit progresses. The board members filed out, talking in low voices. The 9 employees who'd testified sat in stunned silence, looking like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Amy was the first to speak. Did we just actually do that? We did, David said, his voice hollow. We just ended Clara Vaughn's career. We exposed systematic fraud, Jessica corrected. What the audit does with that information is up to them. Evelyn felt numb watching the aftermath unfold around her. She'd wanted this, had fought for it, had risked everything to make it happen. But now that it was real, now that Clara was suspended and an audit was coming and everything she'd set in motion was actually happening, the weight of it was almost overwhelming. Adrian touched her shoulder. You okay? I don't know, Evelyn said honestly. Ask me when the audit's done. The audit took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of external investigators crawling through every system, every file, every piece of documentation that Meridian had produced in the past 3 years. 6 weeks of interviews with employees at every level, from senior management to night cleaning staff. 6 weeks of Evelyn doing Clara's job, or trying to, with Adrian's guidance and a crash course in operational management that left her exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. The investigators found exactly what Evelyn had documented, and more. 17 separate instances of regulatory violations that had been concealed or reported late. Over 200 employee complaints that had been resolved internally without proper documentation or escalation. Systematic editing of performance metrics to inflate efficiency numbers and hide operational problems. Financial irregularities that didn't rise to the level of fraud, but suggested a culture where bending rules was normalized. Clara Vaughn didn't return to Meridian. She submitted her resignation 2 weeks into the audit, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the real reason. Her 23-year career ended not with celebration, but with severance negotiations and carefully worded statements about pursuing other opportunities. Richard Moss from legal left a week later. 2 of the senior operations managers who'd testified on Clara's behalf resigned before they could be forced out. The cleanup was swift, efficient, and brutal. Exactly the kind of corporate surgery that Meridian had always been good at, just directed inward for once. What the audit also found was something Evelyn hadn't expected. Evidence that Clara's systems, for all their flaws, had been holding together an organization that had deeper problems than just data manipulation. Projects that were behind schedule because timelines had been unrealistic from the start. Client relationships that were fraying because Meridian was overpromising and under-delivering. Employee burnout that wasn't caused by one director's policies, but by a company-wide culture that valued results over sustainability. Fixing those problems was going to take years, not weeks. But at least now people knew the problems existed. 3 months after the audit concluded, Evelyn sat in an office that was slightly bigger than her first one, with a title that made her uncomfortable every time she said it out loud. Director of Strategic Operations. She hadn't wanted the promotion, had argued with Adrian that she wasn't qualified, that 3 months ago she'd been cleaning floors, that there were people with decades more experience who should be considered first. Adrian had listened patiently, then said, "You're right, there are people with more experience." And every single one of them knew what was happening and said nothing, because experience had taught them that speaking up was dangerous. You had 4 days of experience and spoke up anyway. That's the qualification that matters most right now. So Evelyn had accepted, with conditions. She wanted Amy as her deputy director. She wanted David and Jessica promoted to senior analyst positions. She wanted the 9 employees who testified protected and promoted, not just promised safety. Adrian had agreed to all of it. Now Evelyn spent her days doing exactly what Clara had done, managing operations, reviewing reports, making decisions about what needed immediate attention and what could be handled departmentally. But she did it with a different philosophy: transparency over efficiency, honesty over metrics, sustainability over short-term results. It was harder than Clara's approach. It was slower, messier, more complicated. Problems that could have been buried now had to be addressed. Complaints that could have been resolved quietly now got full investigations. The metrics that had looked so impressive under Clara's leadership dropped as real performance replaced manipulated data. The board wasn't thrilled. Investors were concerned, clients noticed the changes and asked questions. But slowly, things started shifting in ways that metrics couldn't easily measure. Employee satisfaction scores began climbing. Voluntary departure rates dropped. Clients who'd left started coming back, saying they'd heard Meridian was under new management and wanted to give them another chance. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fast, but it was real. Evelyn was reviewing quarterly projections one afternoon when Patricia buzzed her. "You have a visitor. Says it's important." "Who is it?" "A Ms. Emma Cole." Evelyn's heart jumped. She'd never met Adrian's daughter, though she'd heard about her in the context of that devastating video, that question that had started this entire chain of events. "Do you help people?" "Send her in," Evelyn said. The girl who walked into her office was 8 years old now, with her father's storm cloud eyes and her mother's confident bearing. She carried herself with the kind of self-assurance that came from growing up privileged but not spoiled. "Hi," Emma said. "I'm Emma. You're Evelyn, right? The one my dad talks about?" "That's me," Evelyn said, coming around her desk. "Does your dad know you're here?" "He's in a meeting downstairs. I told his assistant I wanted to see your office." Emma looked around with open curiosity. "This is where you work now?" "This is it." Emma walked to the window, looking out at the city. "My dad says you used to clean buildings." "I did." "And now you run operations?" "Now I run operations," Evelyn confirmed. Emma turned back to face her. "That's really cool. Most adults just do one thing their whole lives. You did something completely different." Evelyn smiled. "Your dad gave me the chance to do something different. I just tried not to waste it." Emma studied her with an intensity that was remarkably similar to Adrian's assessing gaze. "We're having career day at school next month. My dad's coming to talk about what he does. He says he actually has an answer now to what he makes better." "What's his answer?" "He says he helps companies remember that they're made of people and that making people's lives better is more important than making numbers look good." Emma paused. "Is that true?" Evelyn thought about the past 3 months, the hard conversations, the difficult decisions, the daily choice to do things right instead of things fast. She thought about Amy walking into work without fear now, about David mentoring junior consultants on how to report problems without retaliation, about Jessica rebuilding the data systems to show truth instead of carefully curated fiction. "Yeah," Evelyn said. "That's true." Emma smiled, a real smile, not the polite expression of a child performing for adults. "Good, because I want to be proud of what my dad does, and now I can be." After Emma left, Evelyn sat at her desk for a long moment, looking at the business card she'd kept in her top drawer, the one Adrian had given her that midnight in the conference room, with his private number written on the back. She'd kept it as a reminder of the moment her life had changed, the moment she'd stopped being invisible and started being seen. But she didn't need the reminder anymore. Evelyn stood and walked to her office window, looking out at the city spread below, the same view she'd seen from conference rooms she was cleaning, but from a completely different perspective now. Somewhere out there, in other buildings with their own glass walls and polished floors, other people were invisible. Other people were seeing problems and staying quiet. Other people were choosing survival over speaking up because speaking up seemed impossible, dangerous, futile. Evelyn understood that choice. She'd made it herself for 3 years, but she also understood now that invisibility was only permanent if you accepted it. That silence was only mandatory if you chose not to speak. That the system only stayed broken if everyone agreed to pretend it worked. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. "Board meeting next week. They want updates on the new operational protocols. You ready?" Evelyn smiled and typed back, "Always," because the girl who'd been too afraid to correct a CEO when he mistook her for someone else That girl was gone. In her place was someone who walked into boardrooms and spoke truth, who challenged power and demanded better, who'd learned that the quietest voices could create the loudest change if they just found the courage to speak. 6 months later, Meridian Global published its first annual transparency report, a radical departure from standard corporate communications that detailed not just successes but failures, not just metrics but the human cost of achieving them, not just profits but the price paid by the people who generated those profits. Investors hated it. Competitors mocked it. Industry analysts called it corporate suicide disguised as social responsibility. But employees read it and felt, maybe for the first time, that the company actually saw them. Clients read it and started asking their own organizations why they weren't being equally honest. Other companies' employees read it and started wondering why their workplaces couldn't be more like Meridian. The transparency report became Evelyn's signature initiative, not because she thought it would change everything overnight, but because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible in a building full of people who pretended not to see the problems right in front of them. And she was determined that no one at Meridian would ever feel that invisible again. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, almost a year after that midnight conversation in conference room 3701, Evelyn received an envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter of acceptance from State University's economics program. Adrian had arranged it without telling her. Full scholarship, credit for her previous coursework, flexible schedule that would allow her to work while finishing her degree. There was a note attached in his handwriting. You earned this twice, once when you got the scholarship the first time, and again when you proved that credentials matter less than courage. But you should have both anyway. Evelyn sat at her desk, her director's desk in the company she'd helped rebuild, and cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness or fear or exhaustion, but from the overwhelming recognition of how far she'd come from that night when she'd been too nervous to correct a simple mistake. She'd walked into that conference room as someone who cleaned floors and stayed invisible. She'd walked out as someone who changed everything. And in the process, she'd learned the most important truth of all, that the people who seem powerless often have the most power if they can just find the courage to use their voice. Because in a world built on silence and carefully maintained fictions, the most dangerous weapon isn't money or position or credentials. It's someone brave enough to tell the truth. And Evelyn Parker, former cleaner, current director, future economist, had become exactly that person. The building still stood, glass and steel reaching toward the sky. The executive floors still hummed with power and money and decisions that shaped thousands of lives. The conference room still held meetings where futures were built and broken. But now, when the cleaning staff came through after hours, they did so knowing that someone had proven the invisible could become essential, that the unheard could become the voice that mattered most, that the girl pushing a cart could become the woman who changed everything. And sometimes late at night when Evelyn was working past midnight on some problem that needed solving, she'd pause and look around conference room 3701, the room where it had all started, the room where she'd been too afraid to speak and then too brave to stay silent, and she'd smile. Because the mistake that shouldn't have happened had become the moment that changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who'd learned that speaking up was possible, that fighting back could work, that the system could be challenged and beaten if you just refused to accept that this was how things had to be. Evelyn Parker had learned to use her voice, and the world would never be quite the same.